Start letting people in. Thank you all for being part of this. I can't believe we've gone a year. It's all due to COVID. I got bored because there's no one around and started calling people and saying, meet me on Zoom. And here we are, 100 shows later.
We couldn't have done it without you, John.
Or you.
There's a lot we couldn't have done without you over the years, John.
So we've got a couple of things coming up next week. As I said, Judy Schiller is going to be on to talk about retouching and our history together. And we knew each other in the early 80s in New York. And some of the other folks that we've just met recently. And Jeff Shewy's here again. He's been instrumental in getting people online with us here. Digital
I posted
negatives.
it everywhere. I know you saw it on Facebook, but I also did it on Twitter and Instagram.
Good, good.
And I have to do an email too.
Still, here comes Bobby. Another one of my early guests on the show. That's Bobby Enley. Look at that hair.
Bobby!
You're muted, Bobby.
Bobby, you're muted.
Hey,
Bobby.
Tony Lovejoy. Steve Johnson.
Hey, Bobby.
John Conicello.
Hey, Lee. How are you?
Jeff Shuey. Hey, Eric. Skip Cohen. Hello, Skip.
Hi, Bobby.
Hey, sweetie.
Hello, darling.
It's my lunchtime.
Bobby,
Here
are
comes
you
trouble.
friends with Kate Eisman?
She's one of my closest friends.
Okay, she's my friend too. I thought I know she's mentioned your name to me.
Oh yeah. No, I lived 10 years in Connecticut and we shared a studio together for a while. and-
my friend.
So she did my portrait that's on the flyer
Sorry?
for the thing I'm doing next week.
Oh, great. Great. That's wonderful.
And Michael Newler's helped me along this year getting people on the show too. So we put up with him.
No, we don't. Fuck you, Newell.
I wish you could. I wish you could. Be the best fuck you've ever had. I'm going to see the images, gentlemen, please.
I don't know who said
Oh.
that, but I am so proud of whoever did the first "fuck you, Newler." That
Oh, you know who that? I can
that's
tell you who that
Huey.
was. That was
Who-
Seth Resnick. Every time I sent Resnick out to for a free lecture as part of the Canon Explorers of Light, he would call me. He would call me up after the show ended. Everybody was still in the audience, and he would say, "I have a message from the group," and they would scream at the top of their lungs, "Fuck you, Noller," and it caught on. And then John Paul Campanegro and Jeff Shewy, Greg Gorman. I mean, all my friends who are misfits, you know.
Have you talked to Seth this week? Is he doing any better?
The answer is yes and no. He's not quite doing as good as he wants. But when I spoke with him yesterday, he was out at a local bar with his girlfriend, and they have come to the conclusion that the only way to get rid of all of this coronavirus that they both have is a massive amounts of alcohol. So they were when he called me, they were working on the 4th or 5th margarita, and then later on he said they were going to work on tequila. Yeah, that ought to do it. So
It doesn't cure you.
no, but you know, it's the only thing that's basically keeping that shit show together down in Florida. Oh, bad news down there.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what was that? So, you know, I'm looking at Steve's portrait. Steve, you haven't changed in God, it's
Like Stephen Shore?
25. No, I'm talking about, you know,
Oh, Stephen Johnson.
Steve Johnson. He hasn't changed in 25 years. You know,
He used to have long hair. Now he's just a wannabe hippie.
yeah, but the reason why you don't have any wrinkles, Jeff, is that you're taking all that hair into a ponytail and pulling it real tight, so your skin goes like this.
Well, you can't see my cheeks anyway because of the beard.
I can't see your cheeks because of your pants. I'm
I
on
think beard-
Do you
Yeah.
want to see my cheeks, Newler?
yeah, pull it down. Go ahead. Come on. You know, go ahead. You got any balls? Show them. Come on.
I think the beard award ought to go to Harris. He's definitely got.
Okay,
the
this is
beard.
deteriorating.
Yeah,
fast.
is Harris on yet?
Yeah, he's there.
There he is. So Harris, how long you been growing your beard?
He's a stunt double for
He's-
Letterman.
He's muted though.
Yeah.
He's gonna have to turn on his sound.
My beard comes and goes. It generally, if I'm thin at my normal weight, my preferred weight, then I have no beard and I have great cheekbones. And otherwise, I look kind of like a turnip, a Jewish
What
turnip
is-
with a beard.
What is your preferred weight?
It would be
8 pounds 9 ounces, right?
no, it would probably be around 160. And I was actually a coxswain, and I got money from the Olympic team.
Oh,
and I
wait.
was
Go back to that and say that word
110
properly.
coxswain, cox.
Okay.
So I think if I'm about 100, I mean, I could post a photo later of me in my Olympic days, and that's my weight. That's how I should be. It hasn't been like that for 40 years.
If you're willing to
Yeah,
pose, I have a Polaroid camera. I'm going to take out of storage.
Let's
And
say
I-
hi to
I
Robert
understand you all
Bilderman.
too well.
And a silver lame outfit like Ugly George used to have.
People outside of New York probably don't know Ugly George.
I remember Ugly George. In fact, I
I
remember
remember
coming.
Ugly George.
I remember coming out of the Aperture building. I was working, and I came down, and there was Ugly George, and I said, "Hi, Ugly George," and he goes, "Arr!" And because he didn't really talk, he grunted, if you remember. And then I saw him again. He goes, "Hey, I saw you," and I go, "Arr!" And he goes, "Here's my press kit." And he gave me, I still have it, his press kit, which is basically Xeroxes of people who thought he was disgusting. I should find it and scan it.
I'm
It's just
surprised
like
that-
hilarious.
I'm surprised that wasn't the New York, the Manhattan phone book. The people that thought he was disgusting.
Well,
but
I
he-
think it was. I think the last time I saw him was like something at Javits, like a photo plus. But I mean, this has got to be 20 years ago. And I remember he walked in and like nobody was really paying him attention, and he had that like weird satellite shit going, on the box and all. And he was just like, it was just surreal, because I remember, reading a New Yorker essay on how the advent of public access television would be a game changer for all of us, that it would open up all this citizenry and the ability to get past the networks. And what did we have? We had somebody named Robin Bird. I was like, so much for the law. So it was Robin Bird, and then didn't Al
But Harris,
Goldstein,
how
didn't
do you-
Al Goldstein have a nude talk show?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes. Not that I've heard of it, but I never saw it. But Harris, how do you know about all these characters we had in New York at the time?
Well, my family is actually from Brooklyn. And so
okay.
I started spending, I don't know, 2, 3, sometimes 4 months a year in New York, all growing up, because my mother felt that she didn't want me to be a Orange County hick, because in California, that was Hicksville. And my dad wanted to make sure I knew what good pizza tasted like, because if you remember, Shakey's advertised using cheddar cheese and Swiss cheese on pizzas. I mean, it was just fucking ridiculous. So that's why I had this kind of bi-coastal mentality. But I never fit into either. I was too laid back for New Yorkers and too hyped up for Californians. So I've always been in this whatever.
So do you remember all of those original Ray's pizza places?
Yes, and in fact, I went to about a dozen of them on a, I won't, we're recording, so I can't say, but it was an inspired evening of trying to, I had two of them. One was trying to find every pork product I could and eating it in one night. It was just, don't ask. And then, and then the other one was, I had a friend at New York Magazine, and they were doing like the best pizza, and they were doing an article on Ray's. So she gave me a list of all these Rays to hit and report back on. And so, but I lived at that point on 12th and, you know, over near St. Vincent's. So the original Rays was right there. And when I die, they're going to do an autopsy, and I swear they're going to find Ray's pizza. It's going to be marked throughout my veins, my arteries. Because that stuff was like eating a lead. I don't know if you remember, it was like eating like a lead brick. It was like you eat one slice and it tasted great. And then like 10 minutes later, it was like,
Yeah. Yeah, but
So
Anyway,
where were
sorry,
your
I didn't
favorite?
mean
Did
to monopolize.
you have a favorite pastrami place?
You know, pastrami is a real serious subject with that. This summer or last couple of years, I went in LA to this guy who's this kind of hip chef who's trying to make all Jewish deli ingredients from scratch. So he smokes, not bakes or not, you know, pastrami the traditional way. And the problem is, it's, you know, it's kind of a pretentious little gig, but it's also, it was dry. It was always dry. So I actually didn't think Katz's was that great, but I liked Carnegie and I liked Stage, and I hate it now when people use the term, like I went to a local deli called Jaime's, and the guy was telling me how pastrami is the same as corned beef, just cooked differently. And I'm like, no, it isn't. It's a different kind of meat. It's,
Yeah,
you know,
right.
it's like, so.
that's
Yeah,
the
so
thing.
in fact, I was thinking about getting my mom a sandwich from Jaime's today because I had to take her to a doctor's. I mean, it's
How
been
much-
on my
how much-
mind.
How much does it cost her?
It's not that bad. I mean, I don't know. What do I, you know?
So Julie, what is the great foods in Ireland?
You're talking to me?
No, Julie.
Guinness, Harp,
Yeah, Guinness, and then if you can put Guinness into the stew to eat it, and Guinness pie, and you can put Guinness into the bread as well. So yeah, usually Guinness-based products do really well.
Julie, what county are you from?
I'm from Dublin, but I'm living in Cavan.
No way. Where in Cavan?
I am sort of, it's southeast Cavan. So I'm on the border with Monaghan and Meath as well. So just
Oh, okay. I have a
outside
very good
Baileburn,
friend.
Shercock.
I have a good friend from Virginia.
Oh my goodness. I don't live far away from Virginia, and I have friends in Virginia. I have to
The
track this friend
Foxes.
down.
I know all the Foxes and the Lynches.
Oh my goodness. I do know a fox, actually, a Mary Fox.
I know Mary Fox is my friend's aunt, Aunt Mary. She's a nurse.
Yes, she is. She was in my camera club. She was in my camera club.
Well, you could tell you know me because I photographed my friend's wedding in County Cavan on their Mary's farm.
Oh, wow. This is
And
brilliant.
she's my
It's
friend
such
on
a small
Facebook, Aunt
world.
Mary.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, brilliant. Oh, I can't wait to tell her. This is so cool. Small world.
So Skip, do you have any ideas what's going on with WPPI? Are they going to do it in August?
Oh, your guess is as good as mine. You know, they just bought Sue Bryce
Sue Bryce's.
Education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know they've sent out a few surveys asking if we're ready to travel. So I was wondering if they're trying to
The-
recompute.
Yeah, the problem that everybody's got now, you've got half your major manufacturers that still have travel embargoes on, and nobody's
Right.
traveling. Because ClickCon is in August, but they've scaled it down to keep it local, and probably only about 600 to 700 people max. So, you know, doing a show in Chicago like that, there's a lot less risk. But even what Sherry's trying to do in terms of booking the show is the same thing. Every manufacturer's got the same challenge. Tamron
Yeah,
is
but
still
the
locked
problem
down.
really isn't the manufacturers. The problem is, will people come to the show?
Well, the one in
Some will.
Chicago, they will in Chicago because it's going to draw enough. If you've only got 600 people, and if the city of Chicago will allow it. So far, I think they're only up to a max group size of 250.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I
Here-
know the Tamron folks are not allowed to travel yet. You were
Right.
starting to say.
Here in
Well, I
Dallas
sure
next.
would-
Oh, go ahead.
I sure wouldn't want it on my shoulders right now in
Mhm.
trying to pull off a show like that in August.
Here in Dallas next week, the Texas PPA is running Texas School, which is usually about 1,100 photographers attending. And this year, I think it's about 650. And this is the first year in 8 or 9 years I have not attended.
Right.
Where it takes place is only 2.1 miles from my house. But I just can't imagine being in a ballroom with 1,100 people or even 600 people.
I see
but-
Photo Plus has a date now, September 30th, that they're going to conduct the show. Seems unlikely.
No, this is going to be a tough year for shows. Originally, ClickCon had postponed it until 2022. And as a new show, I felt they were doing the right thing because they said, all right, we're going to use 2021 and look at it as a rebuilding year for photographers to get back on their feet, for everybody to get more secure. The issue to me, in my case, is going to be more about whether or not I want to get on a plane. I don't want to be in a flying petri dish. And I know that's paranoid, but
It's not paranoid, Skip.
No.
It's just reasonable.
Yeah, I
Well,
don't
I
think
did-
it's paranoid either. I have to fly to California in 2 weeks because I have to check on my mom's house where we've been gone a year, and all of a sudden we're noticing the brand new floors have brown spots all over them, and they were replaced a year ago, which is why I was there for 3 months when a pipe broke under the slab. So I think it's a repeat. The pipe's leaking again.
Mm.
So I have to rip out not me, but I have to supervise. But I do not want to get on that plane. I mean, I really don't. I mean, I'm looking forward to Mexican food. Don't get me wrong, and I'm hoping that will kill viruses. But
We just
Well, then
came
why
back
don't you
from-
drive?
We came back from California 2 weeks ago. It's the first time that we've been on a plane in over a year. And actually, the planes were packed. However, the planes were incredibly clean. I was fine on the plane. The problem was the terminals. The terminals, there's nobody trying to do any kind of social distancing. When people are queuing up to get on the plane, it's just like everybody normal shoving, and nobody in the terminal or at the gates is trying to keep people separated. And that was the biggest problem that we had. When you get on the plane, they hand you disinfectant wipes, which we have anyway. They make lots of announcements about about wearing masks, and they say if you're going to fall asleep, make sure you have your mask on. On one of the flights, they interrupted partway through because somebody had fallen asleep and their mask had come off, and they woke everybody up and said, make sure your mask is on. So the planes themselves are not bad. It's the terminal.
You are
Terminal is what's
absolutely wrong.
Oh, well,
Take that from somebody who was.
like, can I just say, fuck you, Nuller? Just to
Yes, you
for the
can.
record?
Yes, you can, but I want to give everybody an update. I was staff photographer for Pan American World Airways for 5 long years, and I introduced the world to this Boeing 747 and did all of the pictures for training pilots, stewardesses, and mechanics. So that's my background. I'm going to tell you, when you get onto that plane is a flying tube. If somebody sneezes or farts in the back of the plane, eventually all of that stuff goes throughout the entire plane. There is no oxygen at level. Now, if Ian is online, maybe he will confirm that. But if anybody sneezes or coughs or does anything on board a plane, it's recycled air.
Yeah, but modern planes have HEPA filters. In fact, they have 2 and 3 stage HEPA filters for the latest
Right.
models. So I'd
Right.
argue it's probably the planes themselves. I think your risk is really low.
Yeah,
And,
but the
but
reality,
on the other hand, I just keep thinking about poor Seth. Both vaccines and really ill. So I just think it's, if I didn't have to go, I wouldn't go.
yeah, but the conventional wisdom would set, and a lot of people in South Florida, is that DeSantis, the governor of Florida, has been diluting the the vaccines so that they go further. But in terms of modern day planes, have you ever thought or seen blue ice fall out of the sky onto the ground?
Yes, because they based that movie on you, and then David Spade played you.
Yeah, right. So that blue ice is basically all of the wastewater that's in the lavatory.
Yep.
Wait. How did we get subverted away from really cogent comments about the plane being okay, but the terminals being cesspools? Let's go back to those days.
On April 17th in the New York Times, there was an article called "How Safe Are You from COVID When You Fly?" And it went into great and excruciating detail about the air systems in airplanes today, not 40 years ago.
That wasn't 40 with Mueller. That was like,
Yeah, so let's get back to photography.
He knew the Wright brothers personally.
Are you?
What do you mean? He had vertically opposed engines.
Are you willing to risk it? Are you
Yes.
willing to risk that some mechanic forgot to change the HEPA filter that you're talking about?
I have a
Speaking of filters, do you like polarizers or do you like neutral density?
Yes.
I am taking my youngest daughter out to California in August for her sophomore year of college. So it'll be the first time being on campus. We're not flying. I am taking a month to travel the US with her and land her there. I might show up in Vegas if WPPI is going. I will not stay in the hotels with everybody. I'll be in and out just like I was. I had to go to Florida and photograph a wedding at a resort, and everybody was walking around without their masks, drinking their stuff, and I was in a mad, stressful panic the whole time and did not feel I could be super creative worrying about all these nitwits running around. So travel by the road.
I've got grandsons on the way on the East Coast in Maryland. I'm near San Francisco, and there's no way I'm flying. I'm just planning, like you were just talking about, Tony. I'm planning a road trip.
Wait a minute, you have a grandson?
I'm going to have twin grandsons coming this month.
Congratulations.
So wonderful,
Mazel
Steve,
tov.
having
That's
them.
great.
Oh, I couldn't be happier about that, other than I feel really far away. And of course, all the flying I've done in my life, it would seem second nature, but there's no way I'm getting inside a plane. The terminal might be bad, but I don't trust the planes either. And I don't see how anybody could, actually. I recognize there's necessity and people have to make their own judgments, but I couldn't even in good conscience try and visit my new grandchildren once I got there for another month, or 2 weeks at least. And it's going to be a drive, and it's going to be an isolated drive, and I'm going to camp, and I'm going to buy food before I leave, and I'm just going to be as safe as I can be, because I think the unknowns far outweigh the certainties. And
Yeah.
there's no real
So
certainty in it.
let's hear from some of the folks in the audience who haven't spoken up about photography. Let's get off of COVID for a while here.
Well, can I add one thing, John?
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
actually
Tony.
going to buy a drone to begin photographing, and I'm going to try to photograph our road trip. It'll be our last road trip together, last child leaving the nest, and so I want to document that.
Mm-hmm.
But so if anybody on here is shooting with drones, I'm researching them now, and if you
Yeah,
have a
Stephen Johnson,
recommendation,
Bobby Lane.
hit me up with what you suggest and who I should get certified through.
Well, certification is a whole other thing. You probably want to play before you try and get certified, because certification is a big deal, to really get your license to do commercial photography work. So just get it. I think that's what Bobby's doing now. Just get it and start playing. And, don't try and make money off of it at this point. Just try and get the seduction going first.
Yeah. We have
Steve, isn't there a drone that you can sort of let go, get into your car, and the frequency allows the drone to follow you while you're in the car?
As long as you don't get too far away from it too fast. Yeah. It'll follow you no matter what you do. It'll follow you walking around, running, bicycling, whatever.
Yeah, Tony, if you get a chance, look back with Joe Polilio. I interviewed a few weeks ago here, Aero Joe, and that show was all about his drone work.
Okay. Okay.
That's
They're-
correct.
Bobby,
they're-
what were you gonna say? You were
There are
gonna.
drones that'll follow you as you walk.
Right, yeah.
There's all
Absolutely.
kinds.
But
all
are they
kinds of
legal?
Possibilities
But
there.
Bobby has
May-
something to
may
say.
I- may I
Come on,
intrude
Bobby,
here for a
jump
Yes,
in.
hold on. Let me hear from Robert Bilderman.
Hi, everybody. Hey, thanks, John. Unfortunately, I've got to leave the conversation. I just want to say hi to everybody. And I specifically wanted to thank John for the work he's put in on this. I think it's developing beautifully. And I hope that his work outside of the studio continues to go as well as this does, and that we have more of these to look forward in the future. Fortunately, I've got a 10:30 I've got to attend to. So hello.
Great,
and
thanks.
goodbye, and keep shooting.
Thank you. And I know Judy has
Right.
to leave soon too.
John, I've got to bail, but I want to leave
Yeah,
everybody with
That's great.
with
I
a
just
line.
wanted people to stop in.
I want to leave everybody with a line from Nick Vidros that's perfect. The line is, if God forbid we have to turn to cannibalism, remember your friends that are vegans. They're the closest thing to being grass-fed. Everybody stay healthy.
On
And
that
John,
note-
thanks so much
That's
for
Nick.
everything you've done for this industry.
Thank you,
buddy.
Skip, for your work too. Be well. But Bobby, you were going to come in on the drones?
Yes, Tony, I'm happy to talk to you. We can have a conversation later, but I just have Lee got me the DJI Mini 2, which is really tiny. And first off, if you're just using it for personal reasons, then you don't have to worry about getting certified. But if you are going to use it for commercial purposes, you absolutely positively must get certified, because if anything happens, your insurance won't cover it. You'll get the shit suit out of you. You really got to be careful about that. But I suggest that you there's lots of online lessons you can take. Most of the drone manufacturers have a whole bunch of free stuff, but there's also other stuff you can sign up for. I just kind of went balls to the wall, took it out, flew it around. We were in California a few weeks ago, and I went up to the top of Black Hill in Morro Bay, did a beautiful pan from Morro Rock over the estuary, and went, I'm too high, and I brought it down and flew it right into a eucalyptus tree, which is where it still is. So I went out and bought another one. So, you got a learning curve, and you gotta, not follow my example about, I don't need to take lessons. I'm just going to go out there and fly the damn thing. So, but I agree with Steve. Get your enthusiasm going and play with it. Don't worry about, if you're doing it for your road trip, that's a personal reason. Don't worry about getting certified before you go, but definitely get some practice. And in terms of it following you, you can get a drone. I mean, the DJI Mini 2 is $450. You can spend, $10,000-$15,000 on a drone that will have everything. It will, it'll do your hair for you. I mean, it's like, there's all kinds of things. So, but basically it's not that hard to learn. It's just practice.
Better yet, if you have a
Big open fields.
Go ahead,
better
Eric.
yet, if you have a friend that has one, just go to their house. They could show you how to use theirs, so you don't break yours if you didn't buy one yet.
I want to say hi to Ellen Friedlander, just joined us.
Tony, come on up to my house.
Bobby, I'm coming. Once my child is gone, man, no accountability to anybody. I'm going everywhere and doing anything.
Good.
So Ellen, you just recently had a show in LA. How did that go?
I'm in the process of having the show, but it's in Escondido, which is a 2-hour drive from LA outside of San Diego. And it's been really quite nice. COVID, in the times of COVID, it creates a very intimate exchange between people, which is different. So I've had a lot of individual exchanges over the course of the show, which I think you don't really get in probably normal times. So
There's also some great breweries in Escondido.
if I drank beer. So really fun. Yeah, lots of good things coming from this.
I wanted to ask Stephen Shore a question, because Stephen attended the APAG meeting. Go first, Tony.
I just wanted to follow up with Ellen before we moved on to someone else. When you said an intimate exchange, are you doing the show in person or is it virtual online that we can all?
No, this happened to be in person live. Donna Cosentino, the director, has a wonderful little gallery down at Escondido. And in the back of the gallery is this open parking lot, which she set up for the opening. So it was RSVP, 6 people into the gallery at a time. There are 2 artists, myself and Jody Holden. And so we were split, so 3 people and 3 people. And so it was this constant turnover of 15-minute intimate little exchanges that went on that opening and then continued. I've had direct message people who wanted to see the show, so I would go down and, like yesterday, spent the day with 2 photographers at the gallery, and this weekend we'll close and have appointments. So that kind of exchange is, I think, it's pretty unique to the time.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's been a wonderful experience.
So Michelle, what's going on with you? We missed Moisture Festival this year.
I know, it's really sad. Yeah, John and I photograph all the performers and stuff. We had shows online, so we just got to sit and watch them, which was highly
I know, then I sit on Zoom and do screen captures as my photos.
I know, I thought about that. I'm doing some Holga shooting and a little bit of darkroom work, and lots of going through old shows and keywording, catching up on stuff, which is, I know,
Yeah.
It's very satisfying. But I'm almost totally vaccinated and hoping to take a road trip to the Southwest in June. I drove across country last fall to see family and flew home. Then it was not too bad because nobody was on the planes, but I'm going to take a road trip this spring and we'll see. I might drive all the way to the East Coast or fly, but looking forward to taking some pictures in the Southwest and seeing.
Yeah, I know.
There.
People have noticed I got bored on Facebook and I'm just taking pictures of anything around the house on a light box.
Light bulbs, I know.
And shooting flash tubes.
No, I've been taking pictures on Vashon Island, where I am part of the time of, I'm working with the emergency response staff here. And so I'm taking pictures of and volunteering at the vaccination site and taking pictures of people getting vaccinated at home and support dogs and a testing site and things like that. So that's a lot of the photography I've been doing this year, is documenting the response and what's going on the island.
Cool.
Yeah, that's nice because there's a heritage museum here and that'll be part of the archives of what's been going on during all of this.
So Lee, you haven't spoken up much over there. What's going on? Just growing out that hair and beard. Look at that.
Growing out the hair and beard. We're keeping busy, not doing a whole lot, but we are keeping busy.
We've actually done a lot in the last month.
Well, frankly, yeah. We're in a gallery show actually in upstate New York in the Rockefeller.
At the Rockefeller State Park Preserve.
Yeah. So we have a lot of our travel pictures there from Iceland and Venice and
Istanbul.
And
so we have 20 pictures up there. It's part of a group show, but it's kind of like 3 photographers, and then with 10 pictures, and then a couple others. So tell them about the panel.
So I have this panel from Istanbul that has the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque in the same shot. So you can see the stretch of this sort of the skyline from the hotel we were staying at. It was a great angle on it, but it's a pano that ends up being 12 inches by 55 inches. And kind of difficult to frame that. And so we had come up with a poster hanging system that really wasn't really a frame, but the gallery manager fell in love with the picture, and so she bought it and sent it out to be custom framed, which probably cost more than what she paid for the print. But that was fun, and the other thing that we just got our new infrared conversions
Oh, yeah.
from LifePixel, and I've been playing around with that, having a lot of fun.
Yeah, we've each had infrared cameras before, but he got the color one this time, and I got
Oh, wow.
I got the 720. So we just got them a couple days ago. So we're just beginning to play with them. So just some more stuff to play with.
To get inspired.
Yeah.
You know,
And I had a shoot in California. For Southern California
yeah.
Gas. They still don't know that I don't live in Southern California anymore. So, but that's okay. They don't need to know. So, so we were out. The shoot was in Palm Springs actually, and we were just there. You know, it was like one of these like trips where we had to go like really quickly and do a tremendous amount in this very short period of time. And it's California. We drove 1,500 miles in 8 days. So,
Yeah. And we're out going around like that.
yeah.
Masks on all the
Yeah.
time. It was
I know
great.
I taught a 10-week class to 5 students in person with my mask on, and that was really tough.
Well, it's
I actually
especially
set
tough
up my
in Palm
wire.
Springs at 110.
No, this was here in Seattle at least.
Yeah. Yeah, shooting in Palm Springs, you know, for 2 days with the mask on, and
in like 100-degree weather.
it was rough, but it was okay. You know, it was work. It was like a real job with real money, and it's like, yippee!
Yeah.
Not going to complain.
Really curious if anyone else, like if you're shooting, it feels like the world is normal and you're sort of happy. And then it goes quiet again. And I find the weight of the silence sort of comes in on me, and I battle that. And I keep going, what's wrong with me? Life is good. I have work. I have money. I'm paying my bills. Everybody's healthy. And yet I still feel that pressure. Just curious if any other persons feel
You know,
that.
it's, I think, Tony, for people like you and me, we're so social that, you know, it's just the hardest thing for me is that I can't hug anybody but Lee. Which I do, but you know, I'm like, I so want to hug people. It means so much to me to have that connection. And even like, you know, all the Zoom calls we've done with friends, it still is like distant and cut off. So I understand what you mean. And I feel that way too sometimes. Yeah.
John, I have to deal with something upstairs.
Okay.
But don't go off until I come back. I'm only going to be a couple more minutes.
We would never leave you, Michael.
Okay, as soon as he leaves, now everybody changed rooms.
Everybody put up new virtual backgrounds. So, Melissa, is your son still planning to come out to Seattle for Amazon?
Yeah, we're gonna move him in August.
August, okay.
He decided, I'm not happy about the flying thing, but he decided he's gonna fly, but my husband and I still want to do the road trip out there and go to go to Montana and a few other places, so.
Yeah.
But yes, sometime in August, probably the middle of August.
Melissa, we're going to be on the road together.
Where are you going?
Well, I mean, I'm taking the whole month, and we'll be coming from North Carolina, taking the southern route out to Malibu. Nat's going to Pepperdine, and then I'm just going to hit all the states again, coming back.
Nice.
And shoot. Yeah. And I'll go
Speaking
back
from
to Montana.
speaking from experience, if you're going cross country in August, you'll be much more comfortable on the northern route than the southern route.
Agreed with you. I mean, I traveled for a year camping with Natalia the first time, but we have to take the southern route just because one of my daughters is in Houston, and the youngest is trying to gather her sisters together to support her leaving the nest and going away from home. So yeah, I have no desire to be in Texas in August, and yet that is where I'll be.
Well, I can, again, from experience, I can tell you the trip from Houston to El Paso on I-10 is not a lot of fun.
No, it is not. And I'll probably try, I mean, I'm still mapping it out, but last year, you know, before they shut down the school, I was mapping it out, and I just said, there's no way I'm going through Texas.
I can't even imagine that. I mean, I think the road, the 200 miles between Seattle and Spokane in the summer on I-90 with no trees is pretty blistering.
200 miles here in Texas, that's nothing. That's
I
from
know,
here.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's from here to Austin. I've gone to Austin for lunch and back and driven.
Right. Yeah.
And if you haven't driven through West Texas, you haven't seen flat land.
Or
first-
Kansas, for that matter, Jeff. Kansas is the worst. Kansas and Nebraska.
The first time
Although I will tell you that if you take the back roads, the state highways, there are some really interesting small towns that they're in the process of crumbling, admittedly, and being depopulated in large measure. But you'll find some really interesting stuff in the middle of bumfuck Egypt, in places that you wouldn't expect. I mean, now the landscape, no. Cornfields and wheat fields, fuck that shit. But the being able to find some of those small towns are really interesting.
First time I drove across Texas, I was curious about my front end alignment of my car. So I took my hands off the wheel and I didn't touch the wheel again for 17 miles.
Pretty good road and car.
Excuse me?
Pretty good road and pretty good car.
Yes.
Well, I have heard about when I had a show just outside of Austin at A. Smith's Gallery, and I went driving around there, and someone had told me they still have dance halls and those outdoor dances, and I would love to go to those old dance halls and photograph that as well. And there was a bowling alley, an old original bowling alley that was just incredible. So I'd love to photograph some of that. Unfortunately, Natalia has been with me so much and been my model and had to patiently wait while I say, wait, let me get one more shot. And so I kind of have to be cognizant of what she wants that first part. It's only after I dump her off and run like I'm free that I can go do my thing.
Jealous that you get a whole month to go. My husband can only take 2 weeks off of work. So we're going to try to cram Michigan to Seattle and back in 2 weeks and a few days in Seattle. So
Wow.
it'll be fun.
One of the things that is interesting driving across Texas is that every county in Texas has an old courthouse, all of which are pretty interesting, and there are 254 counties. So if you're interested in old courthouses, you can spend the whole year running around Texas.
A shot a day.
Basically.
I used to live in Texas, in Dallas and Irving, but it was so many years ago that it was actually legal to drink and drive in Texas. And there were drive-through liquor stores. I'm sure you won't find them anymore.
Well, I live in what when I moved down here was called Far North Dallas. And it's just a couple miles north of LBJ Freeway. But at this point, Dallas goes twice as far north as I am, or more.
So you're still in the Dallas area then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if you end up coming through Dallas, give a yell. We'll get together.
Impressionism photo. Newler's pushing his site there.
Brand new.
Okay.
Just open. And it's photos at the end.
Yep. I'll check it out later. Stephen, I just ran across a book that you might enjoy. It's called Science for the Curious Photographer, An Introduction to the Science of Photography by Charles Johnson Jr. He quotes Rudolph a few times in there, but it looks like a pretty interesting book.
I'll have to look for that.
Yeah, it's Charles S. Johnson Jr., Science for the Curious Photographer.
Might be a couple of Stevens interested in that.
What's that, Stephen?
Might be a couple of Stevens interested in that.
Yes, this one's Charles S. Johnson Jr.
I have an old book, The Science of Photography. I used to read through a lot, like old hardcover blue book.
Yeah, I have the Rudolph Kingsley's books from 1951. Yeah, and I use that one quite often. Stephen knows it's on his bookshelf too.
Yeah,
on lenses.
Yeah, my wife keeps asking why I haven't tossed the optics books that are on my shelf from the 1960s. And basically I say, light hasn't changed since the 60s, glass hasn't changed, it all works the same.
Yeah, I keep forgetting, Michelle, that you have a science background too.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
I work as a medical writer too.
I'd like to pose a question to the group.
Yes, please, William.
Okay, so I'm a recently retired family doctor, and I will refer to you folks as members of the artist community. And my question is, why do the members of the artist community seem to embrace the medical science of infectious disease? If there are those of you out there that are not vaccinated and in denial of the pandemic, it doesn't seem that apparent in the artist community. So why is that? It's not an IQ issue, but why does the artist community seem to really embrace the notion?
Because we're smart, we're intelligent.
Are you saying artists in general or photographers? Because I've noticed that photographers are a lot more technical type people. You know, a lot of doctors and dentists and scientists are more attracted to it because just it's a technical art. That could be part of it.
I was going to say, because we like life.
Was that Teresa?
I mean, there's all the things about like duh, whatever.
Well, don't discount the fact that I think that artists and photographers are intelligent. I mean, we think about things beyond ourselves. We think about, and one of the things I wanted to point out to everybody is today is Earth Day.
Yes.
So congratulations, Earth.
So
you've
we're
lasted
intelligent.
another year, and alongside John's photo conversations. But I do think that there is, in order to be an artist, you have to use your fucking brain. In order to be a Republican, you can't use your brain.
Well, Jeff, I'd also like to add that we are apparently smart, except for choice of career. So, you know, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, but come on, that's also a value judgment with regards to the importance of money. Not that we don't need it, but come on, Lee, you wouldn't have chosen to live your life differently, would you?
No, I didn't have any choice.
Yeah. No matter how many of I see my friends living now on their nice retirements.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, well.
But you know what, you guys, I think it's all about what we define as success, what we value. And I am fairly certain that everybody on this screen, like me, values freedom. And I worked in the corporate world. I did the insane thing of being an accountant for British Petroleum. And I literally hated who I was. Just had a conversation with my children about the difference of the periods in our lives where I was artist. They loved the freedom. They loved everything about my spirit. Then I went into this period of being a bean counter and being very rigid and sort of running my family like a business, and then switching back to the core essence of who I was. And once again, my personality, my spirit has changed. And, you know, as I talk to my siblings and they have the big houses and the cars, and I think about all those things that I gave up, stability, money, ownership, and yet I know what I have is absolute freedom. I can take the entire month of August off. I could take August and September off, and not one of them could do that. Right? And they look older than me. They are unhappier than me. I'm not unhappy. I'm just lonely. But there's definitely, we trade what we value. We pay for what we value. And so we pay for our freedom with another type of money. Right? And then we give back to the world in our images and help people to see and experience the world as we know it, and they can experience it as.
Well, first of all, I take exception to what Jeff has been talking about in terms of separating photography and art. Photography is art. Art is photography. We just use a different, medium. But there's another interesting segue that I want to bring up, and it really had to do with this website that I just showed, and the conversations that we had about off the wall, the Hoger thing. And in doing my research for my website and the type of imagery that I am currently engrossed with, which is Impressionism, I found some interesting facts. These are absolute facts. First, Van Gogh never sold a painting in his entire living life.
So
No, you're close. His brother financed him throughout his entire life. Also sent him brushes and canvas and paints and pigments and all kinds of stuff. Van Gogh sold one picture 2 weeks after he dropped dead. Now,
that was tough.
Yeah, and then I also found out something interesting about the entire genre of Impressionism. All of the artists that became part of this group called Impressionism. They all got pissed off about the fact that they were not allowed to show their work in some of the salons in France. So they got together and they decided to do something, which was no galleries, no salons, no advertising, no nothing, just the picture. And they rented space out of another artist's loft, and they had a show. Now, let's go forward to Stieglitz. Stieglitz didn't have this idea that Holger was talking about. This came out of the Impressionist artist and the post-Impressionists and Fauvism. They wanted to just do it on their own, and they were right, because right now Impressionism art is knocking down walls left and right in terms of the amount of money that it gets at auction. So that's my spiel.
Speaking of Van Gogh, speaking of Van Gogh, there's an incredible article in the New York Times this week on Van Gogh's sister-in-law, who was left after Van Gogh died and her husband, his brother, died within 2 years. Yep. She was left with all the paintings and all the correspondence between the two brothers. And she had it as her mission to bring him to the world, to bring Van Gogh to the world. He was going nowhere. His art was going absolutely nowhere. And she single-handedly devoted her life to bringing him to the world. And she fought every battle there was. Women were not art critics. Women were not art dealers. Women had no place in this world. And she fought.
Except in fashion. In fashion, they listened to every woman, which was fine.
Okay, but anyway, she did an incredible thing for the whole world to bring him forward. So it's a great article, New York Times.
It is a great article. I saw it also.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a lot of nice screen captures in it and letter reproductions and pictures of her.
Yeah.
She also became a marketer. She eventually had her husband's grave de-interred and moved and reburied next to Vincent as well.
Yes.
Yeah. different places entirely. And that was marketing to associate the two, but it probably also was something about how close she knew they were and how ultimately it seemed like the more proper thing to do.
What I didn't know also at the time, what I do now, everybody just calls him Van Gogh, and they capitalize the letter V for Van. Well, it's not capitalized. His name is Vincent Van with a small V and then Gogh, Vincent Van Gogh. But we all capitalized that VAN. And I think that,
Yeah, I don't know how the naming works. What does Van mean? Is it Vincent from Gogh?
Basically.
Essentially, I'll bring up something else. Van Gogh was Jewish.
No, he wasn't.
Yes, he was.
He was studying for the priesthood.
What does that mean?
So, he converted.
Wait. So was Jesus Christ. I mean, you know, but
his father was a minister.
His father was God.
I put the link in the chat for anybody who's interested in the article.
Thank you, Richard.
Sure.
The reality is that the word van is something somewhat akin to in Judaism. When you're buried, it's like Michael, son of William, or William, son of Moses. That's how it works.
Mm-hmm.
And the family name is Mueller. So.
Cool. Well,
by the way, before we leave Impressionist painters entirely, I don't know if you're familiar with Berthe Morisot, but she was a woman impressionist. I see Ellen shaking her head, who was definitely one of the leaders of the Impressionist movement and was considered one of the leaders by the men Impressionist painters, and just never got any recognition until fairly recently. Name? Berthe, Berthe Morisot, Morisot.
And Mary Cassatt, is that her name?
Oh, she was later.
Mary Cassatt.
Yes.
Yeah.
And let's see, did Michelle just jump into the room?
But there have actually been a number of through the past several centuries. There have been a number of very good and well-known women painters. In fact, Marie Antoinette's favorite painter was a woman.
She lost her head.
The painter didn't.
No, I know. Did you tell John? Did you tell?
Hey, Jack.
Past several centuries, there have been a number of very good and well-known women painters. In fact, Marie Antoinette's favorite painter was a woman.
Yeah. An echo.
John,
echo.
The painter didn't.
So, Jack, you seem to be on some sort of delay there.
Yeah. You're talking about Vijay Lebrun.
Hey, Jack. Hey, I've been listening in on
a number of very good women painters. In fact, Marie Antoinette's favorite painter was a woman. Yeah, that was Vijay Lebrun.
Yeah.
That's the YouTube has a long delay, so if somebody's speaker is playing the YouTube feed, it's
Yeah,
going to
You're talking about Vijay Lebrun.
I'm going to mute Jack Reznicki for a second there.
In fact, on Amazon Prime, there's a great bio on Vijay Lebrun. That's well done. Yeah, that was Vijay Lebrun. Definitely a delay.
long delay, so if somebody's speaker is playing the YouTube feed, it's
Yeah, that's Jack Reznicki. Sorry, Jack, I had to mute you because for some reason you're replaying.
Amazon Prime is a great bio on Vijay Lebrun. It's well done.
Am I still behind?
Yeah, that was Vijay Lebrun.
Well, you are, but there's somehow your audio feed is coming back into us about 10 seconds later. When you speak, you're fine.
So I'm curious with the artists, with everyone online, we're all artists, what your influences are. Who most influences you in your work?
That's a good question. I mean, for me, photographers was the commercial photographers of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Bert Stern, Avedon, folks like that. I grew up really around commercial photography. It wasn't until I moved to the West Coast that I really got into the art side of thing with the Westons and folks like that.
For me, it's all of you.
Yeah. And for me, it's the daughter I lost, so it all comes from inside. It all comes from her. She was an artist. I was not an artist. When she died, I feel like I was able to inherit her energy, her artistic energy. And I've used it for these last 5 years to kind of remake my life and make it about photography.
That's nice.
For me, it probably was Van Gogh because of the sheer energy he felt in what he saw of the real world and how he was able to find ways of giving an energetic, emotional visualization of that, really with an appreciation of color unlike anyone else before him or probably since.
Mm-hmm. So Bobby Lang, you're going to have to explain Bugs Bunny. I understand Irving Penn and Elliot Erwitt.
Well, let's see if I can do this. If I can turn this, so you can see he's
yes
on the wall right there. Okay, so Bugs. Well, I grew up with the Warner Brothers cartoons, but Bugs Bunny he's smart, he's funny, he's incredibly quick-witted. He warns you 3 times. If you come after him, he doesn't attack. He doesn't fight back. He gives you 3 warnings. And once he's done 3 warnings, if you still come after him, then he will go after you. But he's resilient. He's a survivor. Nothing's ever going to keep him down, and he always has a good nature. So there's a lot of reasons why I love Bugs.
But who influenced you? What artist influenced you? Certainly not
Irving
Bugs.
Penn and Elliot Erwitt, she said in the chat.
Yeah, Irving Penn, Elliot Erwitt, many painters, Georgia O'Keeffe, Van Gogh, all the classic impression. I grew up in Boston, so the Boston Museum of Fine Art has a huge impressionist collection.
George Hurrell.
Yeah, well, George Hurrell for photographers, but so there's a lot of people who've influenced me. George Hurrell shot in my studio in LA for 12 years. So I got to actually be with him for 12 years, which was an absolutely amazing experience. And the master of light, he's a painter of light. Of course, he started as a painter as well. So
yeah, I don't know if people got to see the Irving Penn exhibit at the Met a few years ago.
We saw it the last day. It
Incredible.
was fantastic.
Yeah, I lucked out there because I went with one of his last assistants who gave me other stories about all the stuff that he worked on there. And on the same trip, I happened to stop into the Brooklyn Museum, and they had a retrospective on you just said her name. I'm just blanking it. Western artist, a woman.
O'Keeffe.
You're not thinking of Dorothea Lange.
No. Painting. She did flowers.
Georgia O'Keeffe.
Georgia O'Keeffe, but it was about Georgia O'Keeffe's life and her fashions and stuff, more, and not about her painting. So it was a really interesting show at the Brooklyn Museum.
I loved O'Keeffe's relationship with Ansel Adams, like that whole group of people in that exchange, and it seems like then there was not as much of a disconnect between fine artists, painters, and photographers. There seemed to be more of a respect for that than I think that there is now.
Hey, John, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I figured out what the problem was. I've been following on Facebook because I have to run. I got to run in a minute. The only thing I wanted to say is when Michael said about Van Gogh being called Van Gogh instead of Vincent, we all refer to him as Neuler. We don't call him Michael Neuler. It's always Neuler.
Yeah, but you don't call me Shan Neuler. Some people call me "fuck you, Neuler."
No comment.
Yes.
I must admit that my impetus for getting started in photography was Charles Bronson, the actor. Because in the 1950s, he starred in a TV show called Man with a Camera. And I just loved the stories. And that got me started in photography. And then I bounced around in a number of different areas. And then my hero became Harold Edgerton.
So I grew up
the science side.
Yeah, he basically the inventor of the electronic flash.
Harold Edgerton's son used to live in my neighborhood. I'd been in his house, and the first time I was in Bob's house, we were talking about photography, and he took me down to his office in the basement, and the walls were covered with pictures that his father had taken. And I was absolutely blown away. I couldn't believe it. And nicest person too. It was so
my thesis advisor was Edgerton's teaching assistant.
Was that in Seattle? Because one of his kids lived out here, and they did some programs many years ago that were super fun.
Oh yeah, no, this is in Seattle.
Yeah, and they did some program maybe at the art museum. Do you remember that, John? I don't know.
No, I don't.
When I was shooting for the weekly papers, they invited a bunch of us to a special program and showed us his work and told stories. It was fabulous.
Neat.
At Photo Center Northwest, Michelle says.
Way before I was a photographer, I took a course from Doc Edgerton. I went to MIT, and he was a professor there. He was really fascinating guy, and his work was like mind blowing.
I have. Wait a minute. Let me back up a minute. So you went to MIT, and
Richard.
Yes.
And then you became a photographer?
Yeah. Eventually, like
how does that work?
Like 40 years later, 35 years later, 30 years later, because you could do what you want to do. You learn to be creative and do what you want to do in life. I was a high school dropout. I actually never went. I went to high school for 2 months. And I went to MIT. So how does that work? I mean, you just figure out how to do things in life. If you're from Brooklyn, New York.
Did you know
I was born in Brooklyn?
Yeah, you learn how to do things. And
it's because you understand the definition of the word chutzpah.
Exactly.
That's right.
You should only know. The world.
No, it's Batesums. That's what Batesums are. But Gates did the same thing. I don't think Gates.
Take care, Ellen.
Gates went to only went to college, Ellen. I think 1 or 2 years. Bill Gates
and Michael Dell.
Oh, really?
Also, Steve Jobs.
They're not photographers.
No, but they're
all.
They
did well anyway.
Yeah, they're all people who made significant contributions who did not finish college.
And many
Jeff
of the
Shuey
people
just put in a great list of names. Go ahead, Richard.
The people you just mentioned were born in the same year as I, so it was a good year for.
What year was that?
What year was that?
1955.
55.
Okay, so I want to ask a question to everyone, just based on the list that Jeff put in the chat. In that list, you see that there are 2 women out of the whole, right? And on here, I see we've had many more women. So don't you feel that women have started to make inroads and an impact and have brought something different to the table than male photographers?
I sure hope so.
Absolutely.
But do you still find, I mean, I certainly found when I went to the Photo Plus and I was seeing the Leica cameras for the first time and started crying because, my young girl self was touching the epitome of everything. I had my best friend with me who was a guy, and the salesman who came up immediately went to the guy to start talking to him. Immediately. And anywhere we went on the floor, they went to him first. So do you think that there's still, I mean, from my experience, there's still a tendency to lean?
There's only 2 choices. There's only 2 choices. A male or a female.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
I know.
This is a wonderful time to be a woman in photography, I have to say. And probably the worst time, I mean, I started 5 years ago. This is probably the worst time to be an older, white, Jewish male photographer. I feel, in a joking way, I feel discriminated against. But there's so many opportunities for women right now.
Yeah.
So many galleries would love to hang work from great women photographers.
Of the galleries that are still around.
Of the galleries that are still around. I
mean, for
so
those on the
it's
phone, I just wanted to
time.
give Jeff Shuey's list was Walker Evans, Paul Strand, Henry Cartier-Bresson, Ansel Adams, Richard Avedon, Irving Penn, Margaret Burke White, Stieglitz, Dorothea Lang, Arnold Newman, Edward Weston, Steichen, Man Ray, Yusuf Karsh, W. Gene Smith. And then Elliot Porter and Dorothea Lang were added by Stephen Johnson, and Jane Brown, Julia Margaret Cameron, and Diane Arbus were added by Julie.
I'm going to blow everybody
one of
away.
the things about women and photography is that it was not an easy, well, it wasn't easy for women to do anything out of the house for, centuries. And whether it's science or technical, I think that it's been a problem for equality. Also minorities, whether Black, brown, Hispanic, or Asian, although I think they're actually, one of the things that I've done in the past month is I've actively sought out Facebook friends, which is really weird, but I've gone and looked at a bunch of friends of friends and friends of friends of friends of friends. And now I have a lot of people in Japan, China, for some reason, a lot of Italians. And it's interesting because it's almost 50-50 men and women. But what has been particularly interesting is with this new influx of friends, I'm seeing a lot of really interesting imagery that I had never seen before. And I think that would be an interesting topic at some point, is how the internet has spread imagery, photography, and mixed media, because I've found a lot of people that are doing photography and artwork on top of photography. But to answer Tony's question, I think that a lot of people now have had the opportunity to get into photography that historically there had been barriers. Now, whether it was a conscious or an unconscious barrier, do women not get into a field because they're prevented or because they're not encouraged? Or both? It's actually both.
Bobby's got her hand going there.
Go ahead, Bobby.
So I started off a long time ago, when I started off as a large format product photographer in the 70s. As far as I know, I was the only woman product photographer in the country. I could be very wrong. I just don't know of any others. Women were fashion photographers or baby and kid photographers. And I'm talking commercially, I'm not talking about like weddings and portraits, but commercially. I have many stories, but I have had art directors say that they didn't believe that that women were tough enough to take pictures of objects. I have had it blatantly in my face, I've many, son, of course, and why do I not get some jobs? I don't know. Did I not get a job because people didn't think I could do it? Or they like somebody else better? I don't know. But I do want to say that also, as I've been doing professional level workshops for over 40 years. And when I was in Los Angeles, I taught through UCLA Extension, and I taught lighting classes at my studio. Every class was sold out. I had 25 people in every class. And in the 80s, I would have, out of 25 people, I would have 23 men and 2 women. And that went on for a good 10 years, maybe a few more women occasionally. But at that time, lighting was considered technical, and a lot of women didn't think that they could learn something technical. There was nobody preventing them except the method of the way that we have been raised, right?
Yeah.
Now, since the 2000s going on, that was when really in the 2000s is when I started to see more of a balance. And then a majority of women in my classes. And then, of course, many times I've had all women were in my workshops, which has been, in Santa Fe, Maine, New York City. All those places. It's like that. That's not an unusual thing to take place. What is really incredible to me, and people ask me if I should, or tell me that I should really talk about this, but I don't think it's important. Women who are coming into photography now, if they want to go shoot cars, of course, nobody shoots cars anymore because it's CGI. but nobody would think twice about that, right? It's like, so the women who are coming up now have no idea that there used to be the barrier, you know, that I came through. And I don't see any really reason to talk about it because the barrier isn't there anymore. You know, at least mostly. I mean, I'm sure that there's a small percentage of still men out there that are still doing that same kind of thinking, but pretty much that barrier is gone. And women, I see now, women really pushing the envelope in terms of concepts, ideas, feelings, you know, and technical. Some of them are incredibly technical, some of them are not. You know, photography is a marriage between technique and art. But I really see so many of the women, there's so many women that I admire now, including Tony, that really are out there doing stuff that I never would have thought of the way that I was trained coming up, you know, over 40 years ago.
You know, Bobby, I think that's a really good point. And to your point about just our upbringing preventing certain things, I think back, you know, my first job was in the 70s. And that was just because I had, what is that word? Chutzpah? Did I say that right?
Chutzpah.
You were close.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't even know that there was a no. I wasn't really aware. And I didn't actually used to think in terms of racism preventing things from happening because my very first influence was Gordon Parks. It wasn't until I came back to the States from living in Australia and started working in Arizona where I encountered that difference, the shutout, being, you know, this petite back then woman in the studio. I was not getting the work or the opportunities, and I didn't know to apply it to anything. I immediately just thought I wasn't good enough. And so then I kept trying to overcome that. And I think I still have that psyche that is sort of a constant battle. That's the first thing I overcome. Am I good enough? Before I attach it to anything else. But recently, I never think I'm good enough, but I do sometimes, or am sometimes aware, like in New York, that it was choosing between male and female, and you know, the guy immediately went to the male, and that was more than once. To your point as well, I definitely think so many more doors are open to us, and we're still raising our children in a way that puts things in lanes or categories. This is your route, this is your route. One second, Michael, because we all know I love to talk. One thing I find the barrier still limiting as a woman is in landscape photography. You know, I traveled for a year without fear, but I swear, I still go out there, but I definitely have more fear in my backcountry hiking and carrying my gear and where I'm at as a woman than I think that men do, right? And there's nothing to be done about that. I think it's just a fact, the nature of the beast. That is it, Michael. I hand the mic to you.
Okay. I don't know if anybody realizes this, but when I first started the Explorers of Light, the very first event that I ever put on at FIT, standing room only crowd, was Barbara Bordnick, Sarah Moon, Sheila Metzner, Joyce Tennyson.
Cool.
And at the time I decided to do that, I was asked by my supervisor and his boss, why would I want to have 3 women photographers giving the first event? And I simply looked at this piece of meat that was asking me this question, our supervisor. And I said, I never saw any photograph in any gallery or any piece of artwork in any museum that had a sign on it that says created by a woman or created by a man, nor have I ever seen any genitalia hanging from that artwork showing the world that it was taken by a man or a woman. I really honestly believe you live, breathe, and die by what's on that canvas or on that piece of paper, Red River paper or Hammer Mule paper or
a screen.
Paper.
A screen now.
A screen is different because you're really only talking about 72 pixels, but
going back to what Bobby Lane was saying, though, I just finished a class at Photo Center Northwest, and there's only one guy in the class.
So
and the women range from their mid-20s to the 70s.
You also have to go back to the fact that a lot of corporations really feel I don't want to say the word necessary because it's not necessary, but they really have been given their a finger to be pointed at, that why haven't the female gender been promoted from within? Why haven't the female gender been promoted as advertising photographers or medical photographers or any of that? So there's a push by corporate America in any event to bring that out now. It's taken too long. I realize that. One other thing, I wanted to have 2 photographers from outside the country be part of the Explorers of Light. 2. One was Sarah Moon, and the other one was Helmut Newton. And it almost happened until Canon went to the Time Magazine big event, giving out awards.
Yes, I think you told us about that, what Helmut was wearing.
Helmut was given an award, and he came out wearing a tuxedo top and high heels and pantyhose. and the president of the company at Canon at the time said, "Huh? Never going to happen." So it became Sarah Moon.
Yeah.
But I mean, I instilled in all these people that it's got nothing to do with, at least for artists, and I'm putting photographers in that category as artists. For artists, it doesn't make any difference whether you're a man or a woman. It's a piece of art.
Yeah.
Outside of our little sphere, all of a sudden, these corporate monoliths have decided, because they have billions and billions of dollars, that they're going to decide whether it's a man or a woman.
Yeah, I see Michelle raised her hand. Michelle Dunmarsh.
Hi, John. Hi, everyone. First of all,
Hello.
congratulations. And
Thank
you for all of the great conversations you've stimulated. And I just want to add to Michael's comment that actually I think we're reaching a place where we're acknowledging that it does make a difference who's behind the camera. And it's important that we just acknowledge that, because that's informing the art that results. And that as we think about women being 50% of the population and not being represented as much historically as we're working toward now, I think part of that came from the assumption that it didn't matter who was behind the camera. And so if we can acknowledge that who we are informs how we see, which I think most of us agree with, it doesn't need to be viewed through a lens of gender, certainly when you're looking at the photograph, but each individual is contributing themselves to their photograph. And so I do think that it's important in the 21st century that we make space for that. And that's
but that's always been the case. That's always been the case. I mean, look at Ellie Von Unwerth and Sheila Metzner and
it's
the whole list.
It's always been the case, Michael, that women have been there for sure. I agree with you.
And look at the body of work that they produce.
I agree. I'm simply saying that I think we have to move beyond saying it doesn't matter who's behind the camera. Because if we continue to say that, that actually does flatten the field. We do have to pay attention because it's not going to just happen on its own. We have to be intentional. As you just pointed out, you made a point through the Explorers of Light to try and bring in 2 international voices. That was a deliberate choice, right? And so as we continue to move things forward, we do have to have some deliberation around the choices we're making so that we can bring a broad viewpoint to the table.
You know, I think that's such a good point because, Stephen, were you getting ready to say something? You unmuted.
No.
Okay.
Go ahead. I do have something to say, but later.
Okay, mine is quick. I think, Michelle, that is such a valid point. And as you were saying that, it made me think of writers, right? There is a female voice and a male voice, and we definitely have a different experience. And so our visual voice will also speak to that as well. If that's, I hear that's what you're saying. Am I correct in that?
Exactly. And again, it's not, and I think writing and music are great comparative art forms, right? That we have musicians who will cross genders in the interpretation of a song. We have writers who will take on different voices. And the same thing is true within photography. I think it's dangerous to say, oh, you as a woman, for instance, can only make women-based photography. Like, no, that's not the place. But also saying it's all the same takes away from the fact that we haven't seen 50% of the photographic world in any factor, commercial, creative, be female. We haven't seen a broad representation in American photography for the totality of populations that comprise America. And so I think that's a place of shifting in the 21st century, that we can say, well, who are you, person behind the camera, and just be aware of that. Right? And so that's not about a hierarchy. That's not about saying one population is more important than another population. It's just about a point of acknowledgement.
I don't think that's just true for photographers. I think that's true for any endeavor. And I think it's true in 2 different ways. One is societal. And that is that women or African Americans or Chinese or whatever minorities you want to talk about, not that women are a minority because they're a majority, but whatever we perceive as a minority has been prejudiced against for hundreds of years. But I think the second thing is a lot of those people in those subgroups have mindsets that they're not going to succeed in that endeavor, and in the past have not even attempted it. And I think one of the reasons there were less women photographers in the past is there were just less women who attempted photography. And that's changing dramatically. But it's changing dramatically in lots of fields, not just photography. How many women doctors were there 50 years ago? My wife is an attorney. When she was an attorney, she'd show up at court and the judge would say, oh, couldn't your firm send an attorney down? Nobody ever recognized her as an attorney because there were so few women attorneys. And so it's, as I said, partially societal and partially internal to how we've trained and how we've raised our population. And in fact, Jeff, at RIT, there were several women photography teachers who were doing very non-traditional photography types of things. You probably remember Betty Hahn and B. Nettles, who were both doing great stuff, but neither of them were doing straight photography. In fact, I just saw some work from B at the Metropolitan Museum of Art about 1.5 years ago, and it was a deck of tarot cards that was all photographic. That humorously was, most of the photos were taken with a $7 camera that I gave her.
Michelle will enjoy that.
Yeah. I think that, having examples in any of these fields, right? Doctors and lawyers, and also in photography, having examples is good, but also mentorship. That's the kind of thing where people just recognize young people for their interest and talent and take them under their wings. When I went to the main photo workshops when I was 21, like completely clueless. And there were so many great people there, but I ended up working, modeling for a bunch of workshops, Joyce and Elizabeth Opalenik, and then modeling and working with Elizabeth afterwards at her workshops. And that was really huge for me, just to have somebody show an interest. And I think, you know, people, I think women doing that for women is great. People of color doing that for people, you know, everybody who people are part of their community and have cultural things in common. That's really helpful. And it's great when people can do it for people who don't look like them too. And so anyway, it's a long process of getting people to be that level where they can then pass that, the information and down to the next generation. And
you know what I just realized?
That.
That what, from my perspective, and only from my perspective, the one thread that goes through all of the women photographers that are part of the Explorers of Light for the 10 years that I ran it, is that they had a certain set of balls, if you will, and they were not going to be pushed around. Certainly Sheila and Joyce and Barbara and Sarah Moon, and I mean,
right. So that first generation of people are always going to be the people who are the best and the strongest. But not everybody is like that. And so making a field accessible to people who aren't like that is what makes it really, really fair.
You have to be able to separate, all right, the best and the strongest. All right, I always say, when people used to call me up and say, I want to be an Explorer of Light. Well, all right, what do you do? Oh, I do portraits. Okay, so who should I eliminate out of the Explorers of Light to make room for you? Because I can only have a certain amount, I can only cut the pie a certain amount of slices. Should I get rid of Arnold Newman? Who?
Yeah, but the world of photography is not like that, where it's limited. Anyway, but any field, it's
sure
just,
it is. Every advertising agency you go to, for a job, it comes down to.
What is your point?
What is yours?
I'm trying to.
What is yours?
Michael, just stop. Like, I'm just saying that, yes, the strongest people, the people who are not willing to put up with the bullshit that is thrown at them, are the ones who are going to make the first entry into a field. But to make it so that people who aren't like that are able to have access and have their work be recognized, that's when it's really fair. And then that's when there's parity.
But life is fair.
Let's hear from someone else. Tony, and
yes, Tony.
And Richard.
So the point that Michelle is making, being an artist, the prerequisite is not to be the strongest or the most abrasive or the most outspoken. To be an artist means to be courageous enough to speak your voice and show it. You definitely have to have a patron. You have to have a mentor. You have to have a sponsor, someone who gets behind you. But to be an artist, first just takes courage to create. Michael, it sounds like what you're saying is that in order to get in your sphere of influence, your requirement is to be bold and courageous and push to the front of the line. Michelle is just saying,
you know what? That's bullshit. You know why? In order to get into my sphere, I had to pick a group of photographers that were able to go out and become mentors to 300, 400, 500 people that were in an audience and that they looked up to. And the problem today is that sphere of influence that Canon had with those original 60 some odd photographers was thrown away because they brought in other people that were not quite what they should have been to be called an Explorer of Light. They were friends, they were relatives, they were so-so. And that's when the entire program of the Explorers of Light went down the toilet. And if I'm not telling the truth, I want some of the Explorers of Light that are listening to this come up and say to me, I'm full of shit, which I'm not.
So,
Okay.
Michael, I'd love to just respond briefly to that, because I think what you're saying is reflective of what I'm also saying. That you were
Reflective
managing
of what?
the series based on qualifications that you had defined. And when I was running a lecture series for Aperture, that was based on equal qualifications of, are these people influential in the world of photography? But what also framed, and this is why different viewpoints are important, and holding our own viewpoints. I was making choices about great photographers too. I also happened to choose photographers who were men and women, choose photographers who came from different backgrounds, choose photographers that many people on the West Coast wanted to see. And many of them happened to be from New York, because it was harder to get people from New York to the West Coast. And so Aperture's support in doing that. So there's a lot. I'm just asking that we own our individual contributions to how we determine quality, and not simply say there is a baseline. There is a baseline, but we've all informed that baseline. And we continue to inform that baseline. That's part of what's interesting about a group of people who have expertise.
So I have a question. So I agree with you. I agree with exactly what you said, but I have a question. So I'm part of a photography collective. It's called the Bay Area Photographers Collective. We're looking very carefully at our membership, and I want suggestions from people here on what we could do. When we look at the collective, it's 16 men, it's 7 women, and only 1 or 2 people. Well, there's 1 Black member and 1 half Asian member, but everyone else is white. And it just doesn't feel right to us anymore. But it's really hard to attract new members, especially members of color, because they say, well, how many other people of color are there? And if you say 1 or 2, they say, I'm not gonna fight this battle. So do people have suggestions on what we could do as a collective, my collective, what we could do to become more attractive to people from different backgrounds, so that
So one of the things I would suggest, coming from the city of Chicago, is engage in a lot of outreach. There are community centers, schools, Black and Hispanic advocates that you could reach out to and put on photo presentations to engage young and older people in the activity of photography. There's a photo school here in Chicago that does an outreach that they go and with the support of a camera store, actually go out and, although basically on hiatus because of the pandemic, but prior to that, they went out and gave high school kids cameras for the day and let them experience photography themselves. You could reach out in that way so that you could get younger members, but then also, colleges, community colleges, outreach for minorities. So, you've got to get out there where the people are that you want to get into your group.
Great, thanks. Any other suggestions?
Richard, I have an idea for you. We're talking about photography. We're talking about pictures. We're talking about not being able to identify whether the picture was done by a woman or a man, a Caucasian, a Black, an Asian, an American, indigenous Indian, or whatever. All right. Put out a flyer that simply says, submit your images.
Well, here in Seattle, there's a group called Youth in Focus that you may want to look up
And you
and see what they're doing.
And we'll display your images on a wall with your name, your first name. Don't put your last name, but your first name, because if anybody that's smart enough, first and last name, you can go to Facebook and look them up. But we'll display your images on Zoom. We'll display your images at the local bank, whatever. Nobody knows who actually was the artist of those images until they're displayed. And then everybody that's displayed is invited in for the world to see, for the newspapers to take a picture of.
Tony? Go ahead, Tony.
Richard, a couple of things. The first, to address the reason that they're asking that question, are there any other Blacks in the group? And you say no, and therefore they pull out. Because I experienced this when I had a nonprofit. I raised money, got inner city kids into university, and then they had the highest attrition rate because they were outside their element, outside their sphere of comfort. And regardless of what anyone says, there's an absolute difference in the culture and in the community, right, between Black and white and how people engage. And so one other experience, and I'll be getting to my point within that. Even though I am a person of color, I'm mixed, right? And I was outside of this community that I was living in. And so when I had an art show there, no one, I was part of a festival, no one came to my booth until the main photographer, who was Black, came to my booth and purchased. And it was like he was giving a stamp of approval for everyone else to accept me into the mix. There is something to say with your group that you have now. You need to find out who's actually friends with Black folks, number one, because they're the ones who can reach within that community. And then finding the leader of the pack, so to speak, of anything. Like John seems to be the leader of this pack, although Michael likes to come in and lead it as well. John is the man in charge. But there is always someone who is the person in the community. And it's just like when we go overseas and you get your fixer, right? That brings you into the community, that gives you a stamp of approval. No MIT photographer is going to immediately be welcomed into the community, and no one's going to be like, yeah, I want to be a part of that, because they're going to feel like an anomaly. So entering into the community in that way, I think is an admirable thing to do. And it goes to what both Michelles were saying, and that I'm saying, is that access and believability, believing that a person of color can be a photographer. I only knew that in the 4th grade, stumbling onto Gordon Parks' work. So there's I think it was Stephen who was saying, the self-belief that it's possible. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be undone. The psychological battle that we belong in that category. Michael, to your point, there's a difference in having the work on the wall and then not having people judge it based on it being male, female, or whatever. But getting them in the door, to Richard's point, is so necessary. And if you want to reach out to me offline and have further conversation or suggestions, whatever I can do to help you, I'm on board. Yeah.
Tony, now you're approaching a crusade that I'm just beginning, and I'm still trying to formulate how to do it. But I want to see the National Endowment for the Art budget go up by 2 orders of magnitude. You know, last year it was $165 million. This year it's $30 million. I think it should be $16 billion. Seriously, because so much of what we do as human beings has to do with art, whether it's photography or painting or literature or fashion or cooking. There's art to all of it. And I think the only way that we as a society can advance is by stimulating the imagination it takes to be involved in art, because stimulating imagination also stimulates science, because you need that same imagination for science, but it's just not as obvious to most people. So I'm on my high horse about the National Endowment for the Arts these days.
Thank you.
So there is hope for the future. I just want to say, when I was MIT freshman, it was 1/4 women, 3/4 men. Now it's 47% women, 53% men. So they're almost there, and there's hope for the next generation.
Sure, I think what you really need to do, if you want to try to bring a group together that isn't turned off, so to speak, by certain attributes that everybody has, is you got to stop saying that you graduated at MIT.
I'm not saying. I'm just saying to you. I don't know. Is that a joke? I guess so.
No. It's not a joke. No, because
when I was at the Optical Sciences Center, I was with the director one day, and he was talking to a group of people, and his comment was, "There are 3 things in the United States that are overrated: home cooking, home sex, and MIT."
There you go. That's great. Yeah, no, I don't lead with this.
I agree with the first 2.
Anyway.
Can I ask?
Yes, Harris.
Totally separate.
Yeah.
Stephen Shore attended his first ever APAG Friday get together, and I was wondering if you'd spend 5 minutes just telling everybody about it. And I also think it's of note that APAG was founded by women, and a lot of times, you know, women are not only they end up as the caretakers of legacy estates and their parents, and I think it has that flavor of this kind of inheritance of something without a lot of support for the inheritance.
Yeah. Before Stephen says something, can you explain what APAG is for some who may not know?
For the people who might not know, it was founded by Mary Engel, whose mother was Ruth Orkin and father was Morris Engel, the filmmaker. And she inherited their estate, and which meant a lot of images and films and video, and kind of had no idea what to do. And so I think it started as a group of dinners. And then that grew into an organization that stands for the American Photographic Archives Group. And they have a quite astounding group of people that like to attend their meetings or give lectures on a topic, and then do, answers. And then they have breakout groups where everybody gets in, talks, a little smaller private setting, a little more setting, quieter, more intimate setting. And And the people who've talked to people are really amazing. I mean, last week it was about archives, some archivists. Other times it's been people who have had to deal with, digital asset management and file storage. I mean, it's everything under the sun, including like the tax repercussions and the business repercussions of this. And also, and some of the members are some of the best, known archivists, and Ann Tucker was there last week. While other times it will be photographers trying to figure out what the hell to do with their work. And so it really is wonderful. You pay to be a member. And so anyway, I just thought if Stephen could tell everybody about his impression, because I think that was your first time visiting, right, Stephen?
Yes. Well, I should give you a little background about why I was even interested in the organization, and I'm thrilled that I found it now. But several years ago, the annual PPA convention was in San Antonio, and one evening they gave a Lifetime Achievement Award to a photographer by the name of Robert Friesen. And during his acceptance speech, one of the things he mentioned was that he didn't know what to do with his archive of like 60, 70 years worth of work. He was 92 at the time. And he felt really bad about that. And I'm listening to him, and I felt bad for him. So after the awards presentation, there was a dinner, and I looked him up at dinner and started talking to him about it. And we talked about some of the places he had talked to and how frustrated he was. And I said, can I give it a shot? And he said, sure. He was thrilled. And the first place I called was the Harry Ransom Center. And they said, oh, no, he's a photojournalist, and we're only interested in fine art photography. So they weren't interested at all, even though they have a huge archive. But they suggested the Dolph Briscoe Center, whose archive is actually just as large. They have over 5 million images, and I had a chance to meet the director there. He was thrilled to have an opportunity to obtain Friesen's work, and in fact sent 2 archivists up there to work with Friesen for months, and brought back 16 pallets of Friesen's work to add to their archive. And then a few months later, I was talking to somebody I taught with at RIT. This a guy, Michael Getzinger, who was on the White House staff under LBJ, and he was expressing the same frustration that he had an archive. And actually, I placed that with the Dolph Briscoe Center also. But as I talk to more and more photographers, especially those my age and older, everybody's concerned about, what do I do with this stuff? Even my children don't want it, but somebody must want it. This was important stuff to me and to my clients and to my subjects. And so I'm more and more aware of what needs to be done to store all of this information and not lose it, and not just put it in Iron Mountain and never see it again. So finding out that there was a group of photographers, museums, archivists, societies who are all concerned about this and all working on it and trying to come up with solutions, I was thrilled about. And realizing there are different subjects they talk about different times. This one meeting I went to, I just found fascinating, because that is the problem for a lot of them that they were talking about this time, which is just, I have this archive of photos. They belong to me. They belong to my parents. They belong to my great uncle, whoever. What do I do with them? Who will take them? Who is interested in them? And it's a major problem. And for most of us on the call right now, I'm sure we have huge archives of work. And what's going to happen to those archives in 50 years? Do you want them to disappear and crumble like nitrate-based films are crumbling? Or do we want them to be available for future generations? And I want everybody's work to be available for future generations.
I've actually contacted RIT, and one of my, although he passed away, I'm actually going to give a lot of my materials to RIT.
When I was at RIT teaching, one of my responsibilities was the photo chem lab. And one of the people I was working with was somebody who was up on a 1-year program. He worked for the Library of Congress. And he was there because one day he was down in the basement looking for something, and he heard glass breaking. And he walked into this room, and there were these 2 guys pulling glass plates out of file cabinets and throwing them into trash cans. And they were all glass plates made, in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, and he immediately stopped them. But he realized at that point the huge library of old photos they had, most of which were just crumbling to dust or disappearing on glass plates. And so he was up at RIT specifically looking for ways to preserve or improve a bunch of these works, including how do you clean a daguerreotype? I mean, at the time, nobody had cleaned a daguerreotype, and it's a pretty standard process now. But there are lots of concerns he had. We're talking about 1971, so it was quite a while ago. But since that point, the Library of Congress has gotten much better about preserving everything. And I think that all of us need to be aware of what's going to happen to our own works and also what's happening to everybody else's work. I think it's important to support these archives that not only store the information, but make it available to others.
Stephen, in the higher archive, in the higher, who's at the very top of being able to store all these archives? Is it the Library of Congress?
I haven't found one organization that's at the very top. There are several different organizations with large archives. The University of Arizona has one. Harry Ransom Center at University of Texas has one. There are others around the country that have millions upon millions of images. I know talking to the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City, they think they have a large archive because they have 16,000 images. And somebody like Friesen had way more than that on his own. I mean, 16,000 is nothing these days. 5 million is nothing. The number of images we produce a year today as a world is in the billions. And I will agree that many of those images do not deserve to be preserved, but a lot of them do. And like at the Amon Carter
decision? Who makes that decision whether to dump it or keep it?
That becomes a difficult problem, because I was just about to say, I was a couple of years ago, I was at the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth, and they actually have a pretty nice photo department. And the exhibit they had was photos taken pre-World War II that were basically family photos, and taken with point and shoot cameras. And they were great. They were very insightful. Now, I don't believe all the pictures taken before World War II were as great as the ones they showed on the walls there, but some of them need to be preserved, some of them don't. I know for my own family, I maintain an online family tree that has not only the information about the family, but photos. And I keep yelling at all my relatives to send me more photos to add to it, because I want to know or I want my grandchildren to know what their great grandparents looked like and what they were involved in and what kind of activities they did. So, do the things I store in my family tree, do those deserve to be at the Library of Congress? Almost definitely not. But it becomes a small archive for a family and should be preserved.
Only if you become president of the United States. Then
Stephen Johnson, did you want to say something?
Yeah, two things. My friend Al Weber, who passed away now almost, I guess, 8 or 9 years ago, helped start a nonprofit organization just for this purpose of preserving photographic archives. It's called the Foundation for Photographic Preservation. I just put the URL into the chat. And the reasons he did that is because, among other things, he found that friends of his that were dying, life's work was being lost. Among them, the Monterey Bay, Salinas Valley photographer Steve Crouch, and then others as well. Now, of course, including Al's work. So there is efforts around to try and help preserve photographic archives. Additionally, I have in my possession a collection of glass plates from the 1920s that I've struggled just to allocate the time over the years to scan and index. And part of them were originally donated to a local county museum where they were made, and the donator came in and took them back because they were being so poorly cared for. But ultimately, I do not belong as owner of these glass plates from the 1920s. But in the case of a Northern California collection, the Bancroft Library is a logical one. They're not interested. The California State Library, they're overwhelmed. And so wherever you can support a nonprofit like this particular one or others that are making this effort to really preserve our photographic history, it's really worth doing if you can.
But so where did they get?
I wanted to interject if I could, Michael. So many of you might know the name Peter Palmquist. Does anybody have that in there? Okay, so I met Peter. I was a student undergrad at Humboldt State University, and there was a guy who actually was, like a photographic technician and did copy work and all kinds of stuff. And his name was Peter Palmquist. And I learned that he was probably the preeminent photo historian, one of the preeminents, in the country. But he had been working in this staff position, and it's where my complete mistrust of academia came from, because even though he was a Getty Fellow and had achieved every honor you can imagine for rescuing archives, literally out of trash bins, the school, the art historian faculty said, oh, well, he doesn't have a PhD, so, why would we let him teach a photo history course? And so when I was a chairman of an academic department, I just always kept that in the back of my head. But Peter was an amazing guy, and he quite literally dumpster dived. I mean, I was there once when he got a call that somebody was cleaning out, they sold a building, they're going to just throw it all out. And he literally drove over there, filled it up, took it home. And the vast majority of that went to the Beinecke Library. And if you go to the Beinecke, you can look at the Peter Palmquist collection. It's quite extraordinary. He also specialized in women. So he put together possibly the most comprehensive list and documentation of women photographers on the Pacific Northwest, including, as far down as San Francisco and going north. So, and he had no money. And I'll have to post a photo of him because I found some early digital photos I did of him in his studio. But he literally built like an archive in his home. I mean, complete with the tall ladders that rolled, and he's amazing. He did it all himself. And yet here he was, not accepted for being this real brilliant, dedicated mind by the academic, Nimrods at Humboldt. And so that was my introduction to photo archiving. And that's where I started to learn what organizations would and wouldn't take, the cost of accepting, how radically different it was, why a county library might actually be the best archive, because their cost per object might be $3 an object, whereas a typical archive could be $100 an object. So I think that, and then the only thing I wanted to interject was that, most of I'm a pretty big audio guy, and so I attend the Audio Engineering Society conferences in New York and other ones, and they have incredible sessions on the restoration and the archiving of audio. I mean, it's just like gobsmackingly amazing to see what they've done. But one after another, when they have these panels, they talk about, this one restoration expert said, I just get a box of hard drives. There's no documentation. There's not even a sticky note. Like, I don't know if these are Mac, PC, Unix. I have no clue. And then you get into the problems of trying to archive, let's say a well-known album, like let's say Thriller. Well, you have all the tapes, but you can't recreate the software because the software doesn't exist in a current form and the plugins don't work. So even if you wanted to recreate it accurately or remix it, you have all these other compromises. And so their plea was a simple, like, print out on paper a list of what's in the hard drive and stick it to the goddamn drive with a rubber band. Because what photographers and creatives do is to do unbelievably presumptive actions that other people are going to figure out their shit. And they're not, I can't figure out my stuff. I look at hard drives from a year ago and I go, what the hell? And, and so you can imagine how that transitions. So I think one of the problems when we start talking about best practices, and Eugene Mopsick and Peter Krogh should get like a star on Hollywood Boulevard for this, for what they did with the Library of Congress. For their best practices, project, is that we don't do enough to educate photographers. We don't do enough to educate creatives. We don't do enough to educate in schools just how incredibly important it is to understand that the digital side of it has almost zero relationship to like putting prints in a folder and putting captions on them carefully, So I think that when we look at this, it may be easier to give a hard drive to a museum one day, right? Because now we're dealing with digital images, not physical. But at the same time, I think that we've never been less prepared to deal with that work.
Are we talking about metadata?
They're about making prints, Harris.
Yeah.
Your prints are your archival heritage.
Right.
Don't count digital data being around. And so stay away from optical brighteners, stay away from plastics, use pigments whenever possible, carefully handle and preserve your prints, store them in something that's really does not gas out, like polyethylene. And just, you have to become your own archivist, your own curator of your life's work. And although that may never rise to the occasion of the number of images we may have made, it will, if we're careful, preserve those 50, 100, 200, or 300 images that we're most proud of, because that's a practical number that we probably can make sure we do just exactly that. The physicality of the print, especially with modern pigment and a completely cotton paper, gives us an archival reach that color has never had, and gives us that physicality we need in all cases in this digital era, simply because that physical object has a greater chance of surviving by a long shot than the digital data does.
And I think, you know, when Mopsic and Peter did the digital best practices with the Library of Congress, you know, one of the archivists got up and said, you know, we estimate that upwards of 90% of all digital data will be gone within, 5 to 10 years of its creation. And they said, but so we boil down to machine readable or human readable, and the human readable is almost always going to outlast it. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't put the energy into preserving the digital, And now that we have when you think about Pete Souza, right? They're generating 5,000 and 10,000 images a day sometimes, on a presidential trip. And the Library of Congress, by law, by statute, has to preserve every single image, right? And so then, like when I was doing my research into President Ford and Carter, you meet with presidential historians in the archives, and they do triage. They'll scan the whole contact sheet, and then they'll only do good scans of the very most important images, right? And sometimes that's done on demand, so they don't even have all of it scanned. It's when I call and say, do you have a great photo by Stephen Johnson? And that's when you get the file or you get the scan of the original. But I just think it's an extraordinary issue, and in a way that we've never faced, because and if you talk about bit corruption or memory corruption, then you're kind of up there with those crumbling photos in a filing cabinet somewhere,
Bit rot. We don't like bit rot. I posted a URL to the Library of Congress's preservation directorate. There's a lot of information in there, but in particular, it should be noted that there was a committee, I can't remember the name of the committee, but basically digital objects, whether they're documents, like Word docs or audio or video or photographic, they all suffer the same problem of conservation and preservation, and also moving the digital objects forward, or maintaining computers that can access the old stuff. It's a real problem. But it's interesting, DNG as a file format is specifically noted as being a really good file format to use for particularly raw files, although you can turn anything into a DNG.
John, I just have a quick, Tony, go ahead.
No. My question is maybe going to change the direction of the conversation. So
okay, so let Richard go for a moment.
I had a quick housekeeping question. I don't see the 3 dots at the bottom of the chat screen to save it. Is there a setting you have to set to allow that?
I don't know, but I will. I save it, so just email me afterwards, and I'll send you the chat.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
I would still like to get back to Stephen with my original question of what your thought was on APAG, and if you think other members of this group would be interested in it.
You're muted, Stephen.
Oh no, I said that, didn't I?
Yeah, no, you're good. Stephen's muted.
Stephen's muted.
Okay, I'm sorry. No, I definitely think it's worth not only the members of this group joining APAG. I think it's worth it for any photographer to join. I think anyone who's concerned about what's going to happen to their images in the future needs to be educated, and a group like APAG is great for doing that. So I'm pretty enthusiastic about it. In fact, while sitting here, I was thinking there's an image that comes to mind that chills my heart. And if you remember the last Indiana Jones movie, when they're taking the ark, and they put it in a box and they wheel it into a government warehouse and put it in the government warehouse because it's the best way of hiding it because no one will ever find it again. And so just having a file someplace, sitting in an archive someplace, doesn't mean it's there. It just means it's stored someplace, but if you can't retrieve it, it doesn't really exist. So I think storage is important, but being able to access that storage is even more important. And that's why groups like APAG could be so helpful to so many of us, because I don't think any of us want our stuff after a lifetime of work to just disappear. So I think all of us should go to the next meeting.
And the guests last week were the Gartner, right? The Gartner folks who did archives, and they were placing archives with MoMA and different organizations.
Yes.
And they talked about the process, the actual business of it, which I thought great. And I remember at one of the APAG conferences, one of the leading archivists said, well, you know, what we prefer and what we do is we rewrite to film. So we take entire digital archives and write to film. And then those films are stored in salt mines and under carefully, you know, because they still said that was still the most bomb-proof way of preserving everything next to, you know, beautiful digital prints signed by Stephen Johnson.
I have a print sitting on my wall of a law professor from the University of Glasgow. And this print was made in 1872. Not the capture, but the print. And it's beautiful, and it's 6 feet from where I'm sitting right now. And it's been on my wall for 25 years. Excuse me?
Your camera so we can
you
see
pan
it.
your camera?
Well, here, no, but let me grab it.
And I don't know if people here are interested in electronic music too, but there's a preservation group now in Philadelphia that I'm just going to put a link to in the chat to Electronic Music Instrument Museum.
Tilt it a little bit. Yeah, look at the reflection.
Tilted forward. That's it.
Nice. Say something, Stephen, so you pop up as a...
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I should have said something while showing it. But this is a law professor at the University of Glasgow. The photographer is Thomas Annan in Scotland. And he was kind of amazing because not only was he a good photographer, he was a very bright business person. He bought an exclusive right to the photogravure process for all of Scotland that his family owned till about 1920. And he bought it in about 1875. So they made a lot of money printing a lot of things for the country.
That is a photogravure, Stephen?
No, it's a carbon print.
Okay, carbon print. The paper looks unusually white for that kind of age. The paper usually yellows over time.
No, actually the paper that's on, I don't know what it is because it's on a cardboard type back, a mount board back.
Oh, so it's
hold on, let me open this again. Because this image is on some sort of tissue. This is some sort of mount board back. And then there's a mount board mat around that.
But you know what I'm saying? Usually if we see something that old, the paper white itself is yellow.
Yeah, no, this is, if you look closely, there's a very slight yellow tinge to the paper, but, 150 years old, it still looks great. And were you at the conversation a few weeks ago with the guy who does carbon prints?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, because as he said, carbon prints should be good for a millennia or two. And I know right now some of the Epson printers are supposed to be stable for the prints produced by them, the pigment prints, supposed to be stable for up to about 140 years. But here's something that's more than 140 years old. It was made 150 years ago and is still spectacular. So I
think Stephen's making the point that the best way to archive your work is to get it up on other people's walls.
Well, that wasn't the point, but that is a good way to archive it. The problem is you can't archive all of it. As I said with Friesen, it took 16 pallets in a truck to get all of his work down to Austin. Wow. There's no way you can archive that volume of work on walls.
What did they do with the stuff that they got rid of that they didn't want to keep?
They took it all.
And I
you
would,
know, there's a
I would
there's a
endorse
there's a
the idea.
wonderful. I just want to say there's a wonderful video about the creation of the Barbara Morgan Archive at UCLA, in which the family had actually done this incredible job of archiving the work, of organizing it, of captioning it, and then they went into negotiations about what was going to happen with this. And so there's a great video. You can find it. It may be on, I think, on her site, and how they drove it out to UCLA, where actually Morgan had gone to school. So it was kind of a fitting way for the work to end up. And the other person who helps, the two other people involved with APAG that I'm going to mute, are Grayson Danzig, and you may know his father was Jerry Danzig, the great jazz photographer and musical, and he did all the great work with Billie Holiday. And then Julie Graham, who's in charge of the Horst archive. Karsh archive, sorry. But so they're all really dedicated. And the thing is it's not like a group that has any secrets. It's like everybody there is to spill the beans on what worked or what didn't work. And so I find it among the most enlightening Fridays I can have in a month. It's every other Friday. And so.
Yeah, I'll go to Stephen Johnson.
I want to make 2 points real quick. One, first of all, I definitely endorse the idea of people having my prints on their walls. That sounds like a great. But the other one is when Stephen said something a minute ago about Epson and PrintLive, you guys really need to be careful, because we're starting to get dyes mixed back in with pigments without the companies disclosing that they're doing that because they want a glossier ink. And so we've got some real subterfuge going on, and really look at that longevity numbers. It might be a few years old that may not have dramatically less than you would think. And there is a real conspiracy of silence about this right now. And
on whose part, Epson?
I'm not going to name any particular company because it would be hearsay at that point. But certainly, as you see printer companies market ever deeper blacks, be suspicious of how they're getting that. And one of the ways is to mix dye back in, because pigments have that larger molecule, have that duller reflectance, and dyes have the smaller molecule, increased reflectance, and you can get a deeper black with a dye, although it's going to be, shall we say, a volatile black over time.
The first time I became really aware of the problems with color prints and longevity, I was at the home of a friend, and the friend's father's name was Louis Kondax, who you may or may not be familiar with, but he invented a process called dye transfer that Eastman Kodak bought from him. And his son was Phil. And I remember photos of Phil taken when he was like 3 years old. At the time, he was in his late 20s. And there were two sets of them. Some were spectacular because they were dye transfer, and some were C prints, and the color on them were absolutely terrible. And consequently, when a couple of weeks ago we were talking about carbon prints and color carbon prints, I became really enthusiastic, realizing, yes, we were going to have problems with blacks and with glossy surfaces, but to have a print where you can be relatively certain that print is going to look the same in 200 years, I'm really enthusiastic about. And I'm just sorry that we have so many dye printers these days, digital printers, that people are using, where I know that the image is not going to look good in just a few years.
Or maybe even months, depending on the level.
John Shields has had his hand up for a while. Let's hear from him, and then we'll go to Tony.
Okay. Well, along the lines of the discussion about archival materials and whatever, up until about 8 years ago, my day job was working with King County's environmental unit. And part of my job was helping them comply with all the various different federal and state laws. And oddly enough, because it was for the roads division, the environmental unit of the roads division. And one of the legal responsibilities was whenever a historic bridge was going to be demolished, it needed to be photographed first. And the law specifically stated that the only thing considered archival for the purposes of compliance with this, the act that covered it, was large format black and white negatives. In other words, no color photos at all. Black and white prints, no matter what kind of paper they were printed on, didn't count. The only thing that they considered was in compliance was black and white negatives. Now, that may not still be true. I don't know if they've ever gotten into something that they consider that works for digital, like a digital scan of a black and white negative. But I just think that it's funny that we've advanced so far with technology that we can create images that are such higher resolution and can be ported from one archival medium to another electronically. But as recently as 8 years ago, it was like, no, don't even talk to us about that. Black and white negatives, and we're done.
Cool.
Well,
Thanks.
The story
Go ahead,
about that
Stephen.
collection too is one of the first things we did when we got that glass plate collection was duplicate them onto compact film, so that we eliminated the aging process from the photographic copy. So,
Cool. So Tony, you wanted to bring something up? You're muted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Harris, you had said it earlier in your conversation. You talked about editing, and then could you go back and replicate that editing that you had done? And it made me think about how we edit our own images. And you reminded me when I first came off the road and I was editing my work, I was editing not from a technical standpoint because I really didn't know a lot of Photoshop or Lightroom. I really edited from such an emotional place to replicate what I felt on location by whatever hack I could come up with. Now, learning all this technical skill, I try to go back to those images and think I can make it better. I can't, because I've become somewhat emotionally detached from it. So the question is to everyone here, top down, how do you guys process your images? Do you start from an emotional place, or do you start from a technical place and then move forward to an emotional aspect as you finish it off?
I think my answer is I use the technology to get to the emotion. I mean, it's just, and I actually have gotten closer and closer to editing my photos sooner from when, closer to when I've taken them, so that I could still feel what I felt when I took it. And I edit towards that. I use every tool that I know, not that many, but I use, Lightroom, Photoshop, some plugins to get that feeling.
I'm going to refine my question. I think about Matt Colbert and his process from global to localized. So I think I'm thinking best practices, or do you just, like Richard, you try to stay as close as possible to when you shot it? I still find I have to try to control myself from the emotion of it, right? And so I flip-flop back and forth between just kicking a couple of things into and saying, yes, that's how I felt, and then reverting to what I'll call Mac's process and going down this checklist sort of thing. But
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tony.
I have something.
What I was going to say was that for me, the emotion is the engagement in making the photograph to begin with. Right. That's where the entire emotional process takes place for me. Right. So after the fact, and again, this is my own artistic interest as well, is trying to be as true to what I saw and had that emotional desire to photograph at the time. And so it's less about editing changes and bringing emotion in after the fact than it is in that almost sacred engagement in the emotional response to the earth that I'm seeing when I'm standing there looking at that scene before my eyes. And so everything—
Sure, it's sort of like is it the process or the product?
it's the scene.
Yes.
Everything.
It's
to me
everything. Yes.
Yeah. Everything is sacred about what I saw. That's my
And
opinion.
I think your question cuts to the question of, vintage prints, selling for much more on the market than later prints. I mean, personally, I think the early Ansel Adams prints are somewhat, well, for me, they're pretty boring. And then when you see that dramatic change, you look at an early Moonrise versus toward the end of his life. I mean, that's just amazing to experience the latter ones for me. But the market pays triple or quadruple for the earlier ones. And so I think the question of how we edit work is, for me, it's completely emotional. Although with raw files, changes in things like Lightroom and Capture One Pro, I'm able to get so much more of what I always wanted to get out of a file than I could have in earlier iterations. But I think that I think it's a profoundly important question, especially for work of a personal nature that's not really meant to be a commercial vehicle. I mean, it can be, but I think that's where you get into what are the primal forces pushing us to make art, and to pretend that somebody cares about our exploration of statements. And
I want to address something that Tony has said, and also Steve Johnson. I think that first we need the technical end of what we do. Like riding a bicycle. You first have to learn to ride a bicycle, and then after you learn how to ride it, it becomes a natural thing. It's the same thing with what we do with photography and cameras and lenses and everything else. The interesting part about the technology, though, is that in the back of that wall that you see where my son's picture is a whole other room where I have 5 file cabinets. Each file cabinet is 5 drawers high. Each one of those drawers is filled with viz sheets, 20 chromes each of chromes, like you see over here on the light table and all the folders. And what's happened because of technology and digital, I'm realizing that there are images that I shot, in some cases decades ago, that are perfect, not for just making another print of that chrome, but I can manipulate that chrome into by using Photoshop, Lightroom, Topaz, and a whole bunch of other things into something that looks like, for me, an impressionistic painting. You couldn't do that before. Now I can do it.
Cool.
And so it's opened up an entirely a different world for me. And that's why I've been literally going through reams, tens of thousands of chromes, just visually trying to figure out which one I think will work, and then after I scan the slide, I going through the process of sending them through these different applications. The majority of them do work, but a lot of them don't work. I just toss them away because they don't meet my qualifications for something that I want to show.
Cool.
Okay, my mind went exactly to where Harris's went, which was Ansel Adams, who said, "The photo is the composition, the print is the performance."
Performance.
That's right.
Yeah, and that was like, wow, when
Cool.
I heard that. So I think that's a partial answer to your question, Tony. I mean, it's a two-step. It's a two-step dance, and one is you're trying your best, as Stephen Johnson would say, really working at capturing that emotion when you take the photograph, but it also takes some processing to make sure what you saw is what you now see and can print.
Tony?
Stephen Shore, you're talking, but you're muted.
I may have a slightly different take on this because I started off life as a photo engineer, but I look at photography as a three-step process: the capture, the ability to turn that capture into something that's permanent, and then the ability to take that image and make it into something that can be hung on a wall or displayed on a screen. And so whenever I take a photo, I'm actually thinking of all of those things as I'm taking the photo, because I know that what I see and what the camera sees are two different things. And what I want to produce in the end is what I saw, not just what the camera saw. And in fact, John, if you can share, if you can let me share the screen, I'll put an image on of a pair of images, one of what the camera saw and then what I produced.
You should be able to.
Okay.
I see Jeff has his hand up. Jeff Shewy, did you want to say something?
I'll wait until Stephen's done.
Okay, so do you all see the two buildings?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was a police precinct down in Lower Manhattan. For some reason, I just liked the building. I was standing against the wall on the building on the other side of the street. This was the widest lens I had. There's horrible keystoning in it. But that's not what I saw when I took the picture. What I saw was what's on the right side. And that's what was important to me. And I don't think, I'm not a photojournalist. I don't have to display exactly what the camera saw. I have to display what I saw. And so using a combination of capture, the ability to edit the original image and then turn it into something printable, to me is very important. And in fact, if you go back to Ansel Adams, that's what he did too, because he wrote 3 books. He wrote a book on taking pictures, on the negative, and on the print. And in fact, my thought process developed long before I realized that Adams had written these 3 books. But he and I came at it from very different tacks, but we ended up in the same place, thinking of the 3 different things you do to have a final image.
Well, and that's, I think, why
Ansel would not have been accused of being a straight photographer.
Excuse me?
Ansel would not have been accused of being a straight photographer.
Oh, no. And unless you're a photojournalist, I don't think you have to be a straight photographer.
It's a personal. Go ahead, Tony, and then Stephen.
So that's kind of why I asked the question, right? So we all now, unless we're shooting film and are in the dark rooms, we're all in front of these computers, which actually on some level remove the emotion, remove the beauty and aesthetic of what we do. At least that's what I found and I had to overcome. So I go back to Stephen, I think it was you that said the sacredness of it. And I find, I mean, I'm sitting in my studio, quite messy, but I don't even let anyone come into my studio unless I'm photographing, which means during COVID, no one's been in here but me, right? And I try to keep it this space of creativity that helps me to hone in and remember how I felt. Holger, what you said in the comments, I feel every piece of that wording that you
Pre-visualization.
Yeah, pre-visualization. But Holger, I would like my editing to be like what the great jazz musicians do. There's emotion, skill, there's technique, but it is all there at the same time and everything dovetails. I think maybe where the question stemmed from for me is when we're in a dark room, there's still the dance that happens. It's much harder to create that dance on a computer because there's so much technique that is now involved in what we do.
That's you. That's only for you. I find it a lot easier in the computer than in the darkroom.
Michael, that was my whole point in asking it to everyone else. I'm only speaking my experience, and that made me curious to what everyone else was doing and how they were approaching it. Yeah, it's not a preaching soapbox comment.
Let me ask you something. Where do you think your holy grail is? Is it that room that you're sitting in now, or is it what goes on the dance between you and the camera?
absolutely the dance between me and the camera and whatever my subject is, whether it's outside or inside, in the heart and emotion of it. And this, the space that I'm in, that for me is all about the energy. It's just like, again, in a dark room. We never had a bunch of people in the dark room with us, right? I never did. I did have a couple of hot guys come into the studio and, hung out with me. I'll confess.
I did want to ask even a question, if I could. You said that finished photo was what you saw. Did that include the sky that seemed to be faked in?
Yes.
You saw that sky, and then you faked it.
Well, it wasn't there in the original subject. But when I was taking the photo, my thought was, this is really boring with this horrible sky. I've got to later put a better sky in that is not too distracting, but actually works to highlight the image. I think a plain gray sky is kind of boring unless you're trying to do something where the gray sky is needed.
Something about that is fundamentally shocking to me. A better sky. A better sky. That's like saying,
I think myself more. I think
good enough. It needs enhancing.
Yeah, I think of myself more as a painter than a photographer. And if you look at Van Gogh's Starry Night, that sky didn't look like that. I promise you, but it did to him. It did to him.
Probably.
If you were as stoned as Van Gogh was when he did that painting, you would see that sky exactly the same way.
Cool. Well, I just want to go back to Jeff Shewy. Did you have anything else you wanted to add before we end this thing? We've gone 2.5 hours today.
Yeah, in answer to Tony, a couple of things. Just a second. I'm saving the file.
Okay.
Okay. And
I meant no disrespect, Stephen.
Oh no! I mean, we in that respect, we're all photographic artists. We all have a different vision of what we want to produce. And I do have a bunch of images where I took them in the camera and basically printed them out. But I do have a high horse I get on, and that is that those people who say I just produce things that are directly out of camera, that they're taking their artistic image and letting some engineer in a Japanese camera company decide how to transfer something from RAW, which is what every camera captures, into a standardized form of image, whether it's a TIFF or a JPEG, that we can actually do something with. Because converting from RAW to JPEG or RAW to TIFF requires a converter that makes certain decisions about highlights and contrast and colors. And it's built into a camera where some engineer has done that algorithm. And I refuse to limit myself to what some Japanese engineer thinks is right.
I love you.
There's no such thing as out of the camera, as you just said.
Excuse me?
There's no such thing as just out of the camera.
Right.
Created, just as you just said, by somebody somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
okay, I'm done saving my file, guys. Can I say something to Tony? So the bottom line.
Hold on 1 minute, Jeff. Let Stephen finish. Stephen, your volume's really low.
Okay, I'll try and speak up. When we publish a book, we do label it as fiction or nonfiction. And so I would only encourage people to think about their audience when they're creating something that would be labeled in literature as nonfiction or fiction, just so that their audience understands what they're looking at. Take any artistic license you want, but let the audience know if they're thinking they're looking at a photograph and they're really looking at something that is more related to a painting. I think there's a powerful underlying truth in photography that deserves that respect of the fiction, nonfiction kind of information to the audience.
But I happen to like historical fiction.
I would pose the question. So like I have my favorite example, which I could also show, which is I saw something incredible and then I just took the picture. I was like so excited. All my settings were off. So if I showed you that picture, it was mud. You know, it was just like pure mud. I didn't capture any of what I saw, but I worked on that for 8 hours to reclaim every pixel in it, more or less. And I ended up with what I feel is one of my best photographs. Stephen, would you feel that that was fiction?
I have no idea, but it makes for a good story to tell your audience.
You know, wait, John, can you do me a favor?
Telling the story is what it's about.
John, should I show these two, the before and the
you
after?
can while you got. I want to get to Jeff, but Michael, make your point, and then I'm going to go to Jeff, and then we're going to close up.
Just do me
soon.
one favor at this point. Just go to that website that I gave you. Just put the first picture up, and that's it.
Okay.
Did you say yes or no, John?
Yes. Go ahead, Richard.
Okay, let me share my screen. Find Lightroom.
Just keep in mind, telling the stories has real power at any point in the process.
Okay, let me show you mud. Let's go full screen. So here's what came out of my camera. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I actually saw.
Oh.
And I will stop sharing.
You did well in recovering that, Richard.
Yeah, I was desperate to recover that, you know, because I felt the rest of the story was I was walking down this alleyway and I felt there was a picture on the other side of this construction wall. And I felt it and I couldn't get my camera over. You know, I'm 6'1", but I couldn't get my camera over the wall. And then I looked up and I saw that there was a walkway that was reflecting down into what I wanted to photograph. And so I shot up to see down and it came out.
Nice. So Jeff, I'll show yours in a minute, Michael. Okay. Let me just get Jeff in there.
Okay. So Tony, in answer to your question, a lot of what we've been talking about is blending your vision with your purpose. If your purpose is documentary like Stephen, then
I don't do
well, you don't manipulate what you see in front of the camera. I do. And so I'm not a documentarian, more so than a object realist, which is kind of what you do. But what I'm talking about is you have your vision and you have your purpose. And when you actually go out and photograph something, it is to get something that you want. Now, some people say they want to capture what they see in front of them, which is generally speaking horseshit, because it's what they want to see or what they wish they would see. I said something, and Stephen's going to laugh. I said something to Bruce Fraser one time, and Stephen was in earshot. And I've said this to other people, but you know why Photoshop is so successful and popular? Reality sucks. So if you really want to represent reality, what I do is kind of a hyper reality or a surreal reality, but everything that you do. And then the question is, at what aspect is the image done? In the computer, unlike the darkroom or with film, you can keep going back and noodling on that image forever. And you have to make the determination yourself. Okay, this image is done. And then you don't really modify it except for, doing soft proofing for printing and maybe tweaking contrast or color. But once you have set and decided that your vision is done, then it's done, move on, don't worry about it. On the other hand, there are images that deserve to be readdressed based upon the current functionality of like Camera Raw and Lightroom. And I will go back and look to see whether or not on images that I have a strong emotional attachment to, whether or not I can make it better. And if I can make it better, then the image isn't done. You know what I'm saying? So I like Mac's checklist. If you're anal, you could do that. On the other hand, when I'm working on an image, I'm starting from a raw image, and I probably do more stuff in raw than most people do. because a lot of my images actually are done in RAW, and then I don't even have to go to Photoshop. But sometimes, clearly, you got to go to Photoshop. And in terms of what you think you see, I mean, human vision, if you study human vision, it's not what you see, it's what you perceive. And what you perceive is influenced by your emotion, the context of what you're doing. So what you think you see, you don't really see. You're perceiving something within the context of you going out and photographing, or being put in a situation where you shoot. One of the reasons that I shoot is that I can't not shoot. It's like a drug. Every once in a while, I got to shoot something. And this past year in the pandemic, the victim of my massive amount of photography that I've done is my daughter's cat, Phoebe. I've got probably 4,000 or 5,000 shots, some with iPhone and some with my real camera. And I got some great cat shots, but I mean, what the hell do you do with cat shots? But the bottom line for me is that having been involved in the development of Camera Raw, really since the early beginning, there are things that I know that I can do with images in the raw form that I couldn't do, back in the beginning. And if the image is worth it, and I really want to do the vision, one of the things that I'm looking at now is some of my earlier captures with a Canon D30 and 10D, and some of the lower res 8 megapixel. I want to revisit those and use the upsampling capability in Camera Raw to see if I can make the images better, bigger, because a lot of them are, locked into being small.
Yeah.
So Tony, the thing that I would say is, if an image is done, it's done. If it matches what you want in your vision, don't worry about it. But if you really get better, and that's the other thing, that some people get better over time so that their skill set is greatly improved than when they were starting. So if you love the image, it's worth revisiting and seeing if you can do anything to make it better. But at some point you got to say, well, fuck, it's done.
Doesn't have to be, Jeff. You can always go back decades later if you can get to that data. Do you remember what I said in response to you saying reality sucks?
Yeah, you said, oh, you really felt sorry for me.
Well, and also I suggested there was therapy for that too. But,
So Jeff, have you seen DxO's new RAW plugin or new RAW processor that they say to use before?
Yeah, I haven't played with it.
Yeah, I haven't either. I was just curious if you had. I just put a link to it in the chat. But anyway, Michael wanted me to share the screen here. So can you see that now?
Yes.
I made this picture before my son was born. My son is now 36 years old. I found this Chrome, scanned it, and put it through Photoshop, Lightroom, and Topaz.
Perfect.
And I have an entire series of images just like this. Can you hit enter? Go to that second salon. Go to the first image. Scan across. Go to the Montreal. It's two chromes sandwiched together, and then I scanned it and did it in Topaz. Go to the next one. That you've seen. Go to the next one. Same image, only if you can blow this up, which I don't think you can. All of those that used to be dots in the previous picture.
Oops, hold on. There's the previous.
but all of this is nothing but curly cues but it has to get blown up bigger. Go to the last
Yeah.
one. Manhattan on a Staten Island ferry that I took when my son was maybe 8 years old. Huh?
Cool. Nice.
Can you put the link to that in again?
Yeah, it's impressionism.photos.
Yeah, I'm trying that and it's not, can't
Here,
find the server.
let me stop the share and I can get
You
back
can
into
see right at the
chat.
top, right at the top of the header.
Yeah, I typed it in, I can't get it.
He'll put it in the chat.
www.
John's
I put it
copying
in.
into the
Yeah, I just put it in the chat.
I had a problem at first too.
www.impressionism.photos.
It's in the chat. Anyway, we're coming up on 3 hours here. I'm getting tired.
I don't have enough of this. This ought to continue for the next 3 hours.
And John, the whole point of this to some degree was to thank you for.
Oh, thanks.
Together. So thanks very much.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Did you tell them what's coming up next?
Yeah, next week I've got on Monday is Judy Schiller, retouchers, work with Patrick Demarchier, bunch of other famous photographers who I knew as an assistant back in the 80s when I was in New York. Then on Thursday is Karen Basilis, another wonderful photographer, going to talk about stories. Then coming up May 10th is Site Welder, who built the site for Michael Newler, and then Steve Krongard on the 13th.
Great.
When are you going to have Harris talk?
I've been emailing with him.
When he shaves.
I'm still putting together my collection of portraits of Stephen Johnson. So when that master body is done, and I have to tell you, it's really hard to kind of color balance some of the Gore-Tex you've worn over the years. So
and it's going to take a lot of photo retouching.
And Stephen Shore, do you still want to come on sometime?
It's going to be a few months out.
Okay,
my wife
still
and I
working out your presentation.
Well, also my wife and I are actually doing some traveling in the next few months.
Are you're going to see Bob Kiss at some point?
Well, right now we have reservations on May 8th to go to Barbados, but about a week and a half ago, the volcano at St. Vincent's went off. So this is not only is the ash up in the air, we're up in the air as far as whether we're going on that trip.
So Bob's going to come on the show too pretty soon. Yeah. He just hasn't picked a date yet.
Yeah, he's quite a character.
Yeah.
Hey, Stephen, do you stay at Sam Lord's Castle?
Well, Sam Lord's Castle burned down about 20 years ago. However, the house that we've rented 3 or 4 times is at the end of Sam Lord's Castle's beach. And there's nobody staying at Sam Lord's Castle. It's a completely empty beach.
Really?
And it's great. In fact, if you give me a couple of seconds, I will show you.
Let's go for 4 hours today.
All right,
yeah,
I'll show you. Bye, everybody.
Take care, Michelle.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll show you a picture of the house.
Maybe we should stop recording first because then we record it. Now everybody's going to go there and it'll be lost too.
Anyway, I am going to stop the Facebook. So yeah, go ahead and show your.
Okay.
I'm going to also say goodbye to everybody. I'm really hungry. So,
Take care,
thank
Harris.
You. And
thank
John,
you so much.
I think you're being a complete mensch. This is such an amazing thing that you've done.
He doesn't know what a mensch is. Tell him what a mensch is.
I didn't know what it meant.
I was born in Brooklyn in Maimonides Hospital. There's some Jewish blood in me somewhere.
Just remember Ishtar, right? Where he's trying to teach him how to say schmuck that whole time. So, anyway, I'll see you all later. Thank you so much.
Take care, Harris.
Bye.
Okay, that's the house we rent.
Wow.
And the beach is Sam Lord's Castle's beach.
So I'm going to need a link to that place so that I can rent it.
The real estate agency is Ronald Stout and Company, Stoute.
I was at Sam Lord's Castle 44 years ago.
Well, there was a Chinese company who started. Well, Sam Lloyd's Castle was a Marriott property before it burned down, and a few years ago there was a Chinese company who decided that they wanted to rebuild it and even better, and they started work on it. And then Barbados and China got into some sort of argument, and work stopped. So there hasn't been any work done on it for a couple of years now. So I have no idea what's going to happen with that property. But the little known, but probably the best hotel in the Caribbean is on Barbados, Sandy Lane. And when people like what's his name, the guy who did Les Mis and Starlight Express and
I think I've seen your moment. Huh?
Anyway, people have way more money than me stay at Sandy Lane. I've never even been able to drive on the property.
Well, I'm going to stop the Facebook share now.
Okay.
And we're going to stop the recording. Thank you all. This has been great.
Fuck you, Nuller.
I love you.